Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where the past whispers instead of lectures. Here, history doesn't march in dates and battles. It drifts through candlelight, quiet kitchens, and stories that forgot they were important. Each night, we wander through the strange, sleepy corners of time, the places where superstition met survival, and ordinary people built the world between yawns. Tonight's journey takes us into the baker's hour, long before dawn, when cities still dreamed and ovens glowed like tiny suns. We'll listen to the soft arguments between man and dough, between patience and fire, between what must rise and what refuses to. So breathe slowly. Let the noise of the day fade, because here, in the calm echo of forgotten centuries, even bread has something to say. Welcome to the quiet side of history and the gentlest way to fall asleep while learning. You wake before the sun, in a city that hasn't quite decided whether it's alive yet. The air tastes like yesterday's ash and tomorrow's dough. Somewhere down the crooked lane, a rooster mistakes the moon for dawn. An honest mistake, you think, since even the sky looks confused. You pull your cloak tighter and step into the narrow street, where shadows lean longer than logic. The baker's quarter smells like sleep and secrets. A low orange light hums behind wooden shutters, and you hear the dull thump of dough meeting table again and again, like a heartbeat trained in patience. The first words spoken in the city today aren't prayers or gossip or greetings. They're whispered by a man to a lump of bread. "Don't rise too fast," he mutters. "Be gentle with yourself. You're not dreaming." Medieval bakers actually talked to their dough. Some called it superstition, others therapy. The logic was simple enough. If you wanted the bread to listen to you, you had to listen to it first. The yeast was alive, after all, and in a world where almost everything else might try to kill you, it helped to have one living thing on your side. In this world, let's say, 14th century Europe, bread wasn't just breakfast. It was survival, status, and superstition in one edible form. Every loaf told a story of who had power, who didn't, and who would be hungry by noon. If you were a medieval baker, you woke before everyone else and lived in constant negotiation with your ingredients, the weather, and God, probably in that order. Historians still debate whether these murmured conversations with dough were purely ritual or part of a half-scientific awareness of fermentation. Either way, it was personal. The bread was both apprentice and confessor. The baker whispered to it as if coaxing a child to wake from sleep or a ghost to stay put. You notice the rhythm of work. Scoop, fold, press, breathe. It's hypnotic, almost devotional. The only other sound is the scrape of a wooden peel sliding under loaves and the sigh of the fire that's been burning all night. In some towns, bakers slept beside their ovens. It wasn't a romantic choice. It was cheaper than wood. Outside, frost clings to cobblestones like a rumour. The world beyond the bakery is still dark, but it's waking up one cough, one creak, one tired donkey at a time. The baker doesn't look up. He's having a quiet argument with his starter, which has decided to be rebellious today. "You've had enough water," he says, and pokes it like a disobedient pet. You get the sense the dough will win. It usually does. A small candle burns near a wooden icon of Saint Honoré, patron saint of bakers. He's painted with a loaf in one hand and what looks suspiciously like judgment in his eyes. According to an obscure French tale, Honoré once performed a miracle with bread dough that refused to rise until he was declared a saint. Which, honestly, is one way to get promoted. Your nose starts to adjust to the layered scent, smoke, flour, and that quiet sweetness of yeast breathing in the dark. It's strangely comforting, like finding warmth in a memory that isn't yours. The baker hums a tune under his breath. It sounds like a hymn, but you're not sure if it's to God, the dough, or his aching back. "Talk to it kindly," an apprentice once said in a surviving guild note from 1362, "for it listens as men do." That apprentice probably didn't make it through the week. Baking was dangerous, work flour dust could explode, ovens could collapse, and if your bread turned sour at the wrong time, your reputation died faster than your profits. You probably won't make it through this day either, but only because you'll drift off long before sunrise. If you've somehow stayed awake this far, you're officially one of us, the quiet watchers of ancient kitchens. Before we go deeper, take a soft breath. Maybe stretch your fingers, like you're kneading the air. If you enjoy falling asleep to forgotten corners of history, Whisper a gentle like into the void. Maybe even subscribe. It helps the dough rise, or at least the algorithm. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, tell us in the comments where and what time it is. Bakers love knowing when other people are still awake. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The city is stirring, the fire glows, and the first loaf of dawn is almost ready to be born. The first loaf of the morning is still pale, like it hasn't decided whether to exist yet. The baker leans close, squinting at it as though eye contact might help it rise. You can almost hear him thinking, "Don't embarrass me in front of the customers." You watch him pull the paddle back gently, checking the edges for color. It's not golden yet, more like medieval beige. He sighs. The bread doesn't care. It will take its time, and so will this day. Outside, the alley smells faintly of smoke and horses. A few early risers shuffle past, muttering into their cloaks. The sky above the roofs begins to pale, turning from soot to silver. A street cat jumps onto a barrel, watches the baker through the half-open shutter, and blinks in that slow, superior way cats have like it. Remembers when humans had tails and should have known better. You step closer to the warmth. Inside, the air hums with quiet effort. The baker's apprentice, barely awake, drags a sack of flour toward the table. Every movement leaves a ghostly cloud. You can taste it dry, dusty, faintly bitter. Flour in this century isn't clean or sifted. It's full of chaff and tiny stones. People chew carefully, not because of manners, but to keep their teeth intact. Bread for breakfast, you might think. But in the Middle Ages, breakfast was suspicious. Eating early was considered a sign of weakness or greed. The pious waited until noon. The rest pretended to. Still, bakers didn't have that luxury. Someone had. To start the world turning. Even if it smelled like burnt crust. "There's a superstition you overhear," muttered by the apprentice as he yawns. "If the bread cracks open at the top, it means the devil's mouth was fooled again." Supposedly, when Christ died, the devil swore to slip into every loaf baked by humans. Bakers took that personally. To trick him, they scored the dough with a cross, slicing just enough for the heat to escape and the devil to lose his grip. And yes, this is where breaking bread gained a certain theological flair. The baker wipes his hands on his apron, once white, now a gallery of brown smudges and mysterious stains. He says something half to himself, half to you. "The dough's in a mood today. Too wet." You nod, as if you've been through that sort of emotional dough crisis before. There's something oddly intimate about this hour, the city still half asleep, the baker murmuring to his loaves like a monk to his prayers. Historians still debate whether bakers' guilds required spiritual oaths before dawn, or if those were added later by overzealous chroniclers. But records from Norwich and Bruges show that bread was more than food, it was a legal matter. Short-weight loaves could get you fined, flogged, or, in the most poetic form of justice, dunked in your own dough as punishment. Meanwhile, the oven groans like it has opinions. The wood crackles, sap hissing softly, and the heat rolls across the room in lazy waves. The baker adjusts the iron door, muttering another line to his bread. Stay patient. You notice he never says please. Bread understands hierarchy. Your eyes wander to the shelf of strange tools. A wooden trough darkened by years of kneading, a hook for hanging sacks, and a bell used to call customers when the loaves are ready. There's also a small bowl of water resting near the window, condensation beads on its rim. In some regions, bakers left water by the window to catch wandering souls before dawn. The souls, presumably, like to drink before their next haunting. It's the kind of superstition you only invent after too many early mornings and not enough sunlight. The apprentice sneezes, a cloud of flour blooming into the candlelight. The baker doesn't look up. "That's half a penny's worth of flour gone," he says dryly. You can tell this isn't their first argument. Medieval humour, it turns out, was 90% passive-aggressive and 10% practical advice. You think about how quiet power can be. The baker, half invisible to his own city, literally holds life in his hands. Without him, people starve. Yet he'll never sit beside nobles or poets. His hands will stay calloused, his name unrecorded. Still, every loaf that feeds a family whispers his unseen labour. Bread has always been humble history, a warm story no one bothered to write down. He lifts the first finished loaf. finally golden, finally proud. It smells faintly of smoke, warmth, and something like patience. He taps its underside. It sounds hollow. That's how you know it's done. You realize you've been holding your breath for the past few minutes. The baker places the loaf on a wooden rack beside others. Each one slightly imperfect, slightly alive. He doesn't smile, but his shoulders loosen, just a little. The apprentice yawns again, reaching for a second batch. The city outside begins to stir, church bells groaning, merchants coughing, donkeys negotiating prices with each other. The first light of morning seeps through the window, and for a brief second, the baker's shadow stretches across the table, joining all the other shadows that have done this work for centuries. The dough rests, the fire hums, and you can feel the slow rhythm of time kneading itself into another day. And if you're still awake, unlikely, but possible, stay close. There's a village bell about to ring, a strange custom about bread sizes you'll want to hear, and a few more whispers from the ovens that never quite sleep. The bell rings with a lazy wobble, as if it, too, was dragged out of bed too early. The sound leaks through the alleyways, bouncing off the wet stone and into your ears, like a polite announcement that morning has officially begun, not that anyone's particularly excited about it. You step outside with the baker. The air is sharper now, bright with cold and the faint promise of rain. The street stretches ahead, uneven and narrow, lined with shutters that creak open like yawns. Someone dumps a bucket of grey water into the gutter, and steam curls up where it meets the chill. The medieval morning commute begins. A horse, 2 chickens, and 1 woman already complaining about taxes. You follow the baker to the communal bread stall, a wooden counter beneath a faded canopy that looks like it's survived more winters than logic allows. Here, he'll sell the bread, or rather, he'll sell permission for people to eat it. Because in this world, bread isn't just bread. It's bureaucracy in edible form. By the 13th century, cities like London and Paris had entire departments for regulating the price, weight, and purity of bread. The assize of bread and ale, as it was called, set strict laws. Too small a loaf? Fined. Too heavy? Fined. Too burned? Somehow, still fined. It was medieval quality control, with the charm of a modern tax audit. Historians still debate whether these bread laws were genuinely about fairness or just another way for local lords to profit off human hunger. Probably both. Either way, bakers learned to measure flour like their lives depended on it because they kind of did. A local official arrives a man whose clothes look more expensive than his job. He carries scales, squints at the loaves, and nods with the slow satisfaction of someone who enjoys being the most important person before sunrise. The baker watches him the way one might watch a cat sit on freshly washed laundry. Too light by an ounce, the inspector murmurs. The baker sighs. He knows the script. A small coin changes hands, not enough to buy silence, but enough to rent it for the morning. You look around. No one seems to notice. Everyone's pretending to be somewhere else, which is practically the national pastime of the Middle Ages. Nearby, a woman buys a loaf and blesses it 3 times before tucking it under her shawl. It's an old habit, a ward against curses and hunger. In parts of England and France, it was said that if you dropped bread on the ground, you had to kiss it in apology, because it carried the memory of Christ's body. Bread wasn't food, it was theology with a crust. You take a slow breath. The scent of the loaves is everywhere now, warm, soft, faintly smoky. It fills the street like a secret everyone agrees to share. Somewhere, a rooster finally gets it right and crows on time. The city answers with a cough of chimneys and the shuffle of wooden shoes. The baker hands a loaf to a young boy who can't quite reach the counter. The boy's hands are smudged with soot, probably from the blacksmith's shop, and his smile shows more missing teeth than remaining ones. The baker ruffles his hair and adds an extra crust to the sack. A quiet rebellion, in carbohydrate form. There's a story that in some towns, bakers made test loaves, smaller samples baked first to test the oven's heat. These weren't sold. Instead, they were often given to beggars, stray dogs, or unlucky apprentices. Over time, this became known as the baker's dozen, 13 loaves instead of 12, a superstition of safety against fines. Better to give 1 extra than risk losing your trade. Funny how generosity can start as anxiety. The baker glances toward the sky, clouds gathering in slow grey folds. Rain, he mutters. The apprentice grumbles something about having just dried the wood. You can't tell if it's sarcasm or prophecy. Both seem equally valid. Here, you wander a few paces down the lane. The city feels wider now, though not necessarily cleaner. You pass a tannery, a man selling onions out of a basket, and a musician tuning an instrument that sounds halfway between a harp and a headache. The air is alive with tiny noises, church bells far away, laughter close by, and the soft rhythm of feet on cobblestone. A stray dog follows you. Hopeful, you consider sharing a crust, but remember, it's worth almost a penny a week's rent in some places. You settle for a pat on the head instead. The dog pretends to forgive you. The baker calls you back. He's wrapping up his stall, counting coins, shaking his head at the math of survival. He's been awake since midnight, and he'll sleep again only when the sun is high. Every loaf's a prayer, he says softly. You knead it. You bake it. You hope someone buys it before it goes stale. That's all anyone does, really. He looks at you like he's about to say more, then changes his mind. He picks up his paddle and gestures down a side street. Come on, you should see where the millers get their flour. You'll never complain about modern grocery stores again. You follow, the smell of bread fading behind you, replaced by the sharp tang of grain dust and river water. The sky is turning brighter now, though it feels less like dawn and more like daylight intruding where it doesn't belong. Somewhere ahead, the sound of water wheels begins to rumble, slow, deep, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of an old world grinding itself into another day. And as you walk, you can't help but think. Every loaf starts here, in the endless conversation between water, stone, and sleep-deprived humans who just wanted breakfast to mean something. The path to the mill follows the river, which looks suspiciously like it hasn't been cleaned since the Romans left. It smells faintly of mud, fish, and whatever fell in last week and decided to stay. The baker walks ahead, his steps steady, practiced. You follow at a slower rhythm, watching sunlight break across the water in uneven flashes. The mill looms in the distance, a heavy wooden building leaning slightly, as though tired of standing. The wheel turns with a lazy creak, each groan echoing through the valley like the sigh of an old beast. The sound is strangely comforting. It reminds you that even medieval technology yawned before breakfast. Inside, it's loud. Water crashes through the sluice, gears grind, and dust fills the air like a low fog. The miller, a man with arms like bread loaves and an expression that suggests permanent suspicion, notices you. He nods without smiling, the universal greeting of someone who's already been awake for far too long. He turns to shout over the noise. Mind your breath. Flour dust gets everywhere. In your lungs too, if you're unlucky. You take his advice immediately. The air tastes dry, gritty, like someone mixed chalk with regret. The baker greets, him with the easy familiarity of shared exhaustion. Wheels running slow again, he says. The miller shrugs. River's low. God's stingy with rain this week. You watch as he opens a hatch, releasing a small cascade of grain into the millstones below. The stones themselves are enormous, pale, circular, and engraved with shallow grooves. They turn together in patient rhythm, grinding the wheat into powder finer than snow. It's hypnotic to watch. The endless circling, the transformation of something solid into something soft. Historians still debate whether medieval millers were universally hated, or just mostly hated. They were notorious for skimming a handful of flour off every sack as payment, earning a reputation somewhere between essential worker and local villain. There's even a saying from the period, God bless the miller after we count the bags. The miller laughs when you ask about it. We only take what's owed, he says, while discreetly brushing a bit of flour from his sleeve into a pouch. You decide not to mention it. The mill's floor is alive with vibration. Every plank hums softly beneath your boots, like the building itself is whispering. The rhythm becomes a kind of music, rough and steady. In a way, it is music, the percussion of human hunger and river patience. You imagine this same wheel turning through centuries, grinding wheat for kings and paupers alike. See that? The baker points to a narrow trough. Water runs through it, driving the wheel. It never stops, day or night. We sleep in shifts sometimes, so the mill can rest when we can't. It hits you then how much of this world runs on exhaustion. People talk to their bread, beg favors from rivers, and trade hours of sleep for a few sacks of grain. And somehow, the rhythm holds. The miller's wife appears from a doorway, her apron dusted in white, her hair pinned back with a wooden comb. She carries a small basket of dried herbs. To keep the flour sweet, she says, sprinkling a pinch into a sack. It smells faintly of thyme, and something unfamiliar, maybe superstition. She smiles when she sees your puzzled look. Keeps spirits out. They don't like the smell of honest work. Outside, the river glints brighter. The morning has fully arrived, though the light here feels filtered, heavy. You hear a cart approaching the baker's flour delivery. 2 donkeys pull it, both looking like they regret every decision that led them to this moment. The miller and baker begin loading sacks. You lend a hand, instantly regretting it. The flour bags are heavier than philosophy. Each one thuds into the cart with a puff of white dust. The world looks softer for a moment, coated in powdered silence. A small detail catches your eye. A carved symbol above the mill door. A spiral surrounded by 4 dots. The miller notices your stare. Old charm, he says. From before the church built that big one. Downriver. Means the wheel turns the world. You ask if he believes that. He grins, a rare sight. Believe it? No. But it keeps the wheel turning, doesn't it? And maybe that's the heart of it. In this age, belief isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's just how you keep the dust from settling on your sanity. The baker ties down the last sack, pats the side of the cart, and nods to you. Back to the shop, he says, before the customers start complaining about God's timing. You glance once more at the turning wheel. It moves endlessly, neither hurried nor slow. A reminder that progress doesn't always look like motion. Sometimes it just looks like endurance. As you walk back along the river, the water's murmur fades behind you. The baker hums quietly, a tune without words. You realize it's the same rhythm as the mill wheel. A slow, steady lullaby for a world too busy surviving to sleep. By the time you return to the city gates, the market has come, alive. Voices echo. Dogs bark. A merchant calls out about cheap onions that somehow still smell expensive. You can almost feel the city's pulse returning. And amid all this noise, the baker sighs, looking down at his hands, flour still caught in every crease. All this, he says softly, just so no one has to think about where their bread comes from. You don't answer. You just listen to the hum of the market, to the echo of the river, to the quiet churn of unseen wheels that keep history turning. By mid-morning, the city has officially woken up, not gracefully, but in the chaotic, half-grumpy way of anything human. The streets are crowded now, merchants shouting, children running, horses disagreeing with physics. The baker's cart rattles over cobblestones that were clearly not designed for wheels, each bump sending a puff of flour into the air like small clouds of defeat. You follow him through the market square, where the smells compete for your attention. Warm bread, wet leather, boiled cabbage, and that uniquely medieval perfume of unidentified livestock contribution. The baker barely notices. He's done this every day of his life. The rhythm of work replaces the rhythm of thought. You stop at his stall again. The same wooden table now surrounded by customers with coins and complaints. One woman points at a loaf and frowns. This one's smaller than yesterday. It's the humidity, the baker says automatically. He says it the way modern people say. It's the algorithm. Nobody really understands it, but it sounds official enough to end the conversation. He wraps her loaf in cloth, and you see her hand linger, 2 fingers brushing the bread's crust before she tucks it away. It's subtle, reverent even. Bread isn't just food here. It's touchable safety, edible luck. There's a peculiar ritual happening beside you. A young man leans over a loaf, whispers something you can't hear, and then presses his thumb into the crust before walking away. You look at the baker, puzzled. He smirks. Old trick. He's sealing a wish. Everyone wants something from bread. Health, love, a tax exemption. Historians still debate whether these thumbprints were genuine folk charms, or just a way to mark loaves during busy markets. Either way, the superstition lingered. In some towns, people believed that eating bread with another's thumbprint could bring you their dreams, which raises certain sanitary questions best left unasked. The apprentice, now more awake but no less unimpressed, is arranging loaves in neat rows. His hair is white with flour, his eyes half shut. "The bread's talking again," he says. You glance at the table. The crusts are cracking softly in the cooling air, each one releasing a tiny hiss, the sound of trapped steam escaping. It does sound like whispering if you listen long enough. "That means they're happy," the baker murmurs. "They sing when they cool." He says it like he means it. You half believe him. Nearby, a street juggler tosses 3 apples in the air, misses one, and acts like it was intentional. 2 monks argue over the price of cheese. A butcher waves his cleaver for emphasis in a conversation that probably didn't need a cleaver. Medieval life, you realize, is a constant compromise between sincerity and absurdity. And through it all, the bread keeps selling. Loaf after loaf, coin after coin. The baker wipes his brow with the back of his hand. "We talk too. The bread," he says quietly, almost to himself, "because it listens better than people." It's not a joke, though it sounds like one. There's something deeper there, a kind of confession wrapped in routine. For him, each loaf carries the small dignity of survival, the invisible warmth of something that will vanish by nightfall. You notice a child tugging at his mother's sleeve, pointing toward a loaf shaped like a spiral. The baker follows the gesture. "Ah, that one's special. The spiral bread," he explains, "is for St. Martin's Day, an annual celebration marking the end of harvest. They say the spiral keeps bad spirits dizzy," he says with a straight face. "Confuses them so they can't find your door." The apprentice snorts. "Or it just looks nice." The baker glares at him. "You can't prove it doesn't work." The child laughs. The mother buys the spiral. Somewhere between superstition and good marketing, faith and flour keep shaking hands. A gust of wind sweeps through the market, carrying scraps of straw and the faint clang of distant bells. Noon is approaching, that sacred moment when bakers finally stop to eat the thing they've been smelling for hours. You sit beside the stall as the baker breaks open a loaf. The crust cracks with a soft sigh. Steam curls upward like a ghost that doesn't want to leave. He passes you a piece. It's coarse, nutty, slightly sour, alive in a way modern bread rarely is. "This batch," he says, chewing slowly, "was mixed when the moon was full. That's supposed to make it lucky." You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. "So far, I haven't died. That's something." A faint chuckle escapes you. It's the kind of joke people make when they've accepted the world's ridiculousness as permanent. The apprentice eats too, tearing his piece carelessly. He looks out at the street, at the people passing by with loaves under their arms. "You ever wonder," he asks, "how many words have been spoken over bread?" The baker chews in silence, then says, "Enough to feed the world twice." You lean back against the wall, half full, half drowsy. The smell of bread still hangs in the air, and your eyelids feel heavy, but the baker's already on his feet again. "Break's over," he says, brushing crumbs from his apron. "Next batch won't knead itself." You follow him back toward the warm light of the bakery, past the flicker of candles and the quiet hum of ovens. Outside, the city keeps buzzing. Inside, time slows again, the sound of hands on dough, the low murmur of yeast still dreaming, and the endless conversation between people and the bread that keeps them alive. And somewhere, deep in the glow of the oven, you swear you can still hear it, the bread whispering back. The bakery feels different at midday. The light coming through the window is fuller now, less gold, more honest. It spills across the flour-dusted counter and makes the air look thicker, like sunlight is kneading the space itself. The baker wipes his hands and glances at the next round of dough resting in the trough. It looks like a sleeping animal, still breathing, still plotting. You watch him stretch it gently, folding it over with a patience that borders on religion. "It's all timing," he says. "Too soon, and it sulks. Too late, and it sulks louder." You get the impression dough has many moods, and all of them are passive-aggressive. He sprinkles flour in a slow, practiced rhythm, almost hypnotic. The apprentice hums tunelessly while sweeping crumbs off the floor, and for a moment, the entire room hums with quiet repetition. You start to understand why they talk to the dough. It's the only thing in the building that doesn't argue back. In the corner, a tall jar bubbles faintly, the starter. It's older than both men, passed down through years of careful feeding. "That's our ancestor," the baker says with dry pride. Keeps the line alive. You could say we're in a codependent relationship. You laugh softly, and he smirks. No, truly. If it dies, we start over from nothing. It's the same yeast our fathers used. A few of these jars have survived plagues, fires, and bad apprentices. It's more reliable than the church. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers understood the science behind fermentation or treated it as divine mystery. Most likely, it was both equal parts craft and faith, like everything else back then. The starter was a living relic, a proof that something invisible could shape the world. The baker dips a finger into the mixture, stirs, then nods approvingly. Still breathing, he says. Unlike my apprentice. The boy doesn't look up. Still here, he mumbles, sweeping another ghostly pile of flour. You take a seat near the oven. The air is warm, dry, and heavy with the scent of firewood and yeast. It's the kind of smell that could make you believe time is edible. From outside comes the faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer, rhythmic, distant, like another heartbeat joining the city's pulse. The baker listens to it while kneading, syncing his movements to the sound. He works metal, I work air, he says. Mine's lighter, but harder to tame. You notice a strange object hanging from the ceiling, a bundle of twigs tied with ribbon, dusted with ash. Protection, the baker explains, when he catches your glance, from bad luck and mice. He hesitates, then adds, mostly the mice. Apparently, in some regions, bakers believed their ovens had spirits, oven sprites, or hearth elves, who controlled the rise and fall of dough. To keep them happy, bakers hung charms made of willow or rosemary above the hearth. If you forget to greet them, he says, your loaves come out hollow. The apprentice snickers. You also said that about Mondays. Exactly, the baker says, dead, serious. Hollow days make hollow bread. The humour lands softly, blending into the rhythm of kneading and the low murmur of coals. You realise there's a strange calm in this work, a steady intimacy between motion and silence. Each fold, each stretch, is like turning a page in a very long book. Outside, a group of children run past, shouting. One of them stops to peek through the window. The baker winks, tosses her a tiny roll, and the others cheer as she catches it. Bread diplomacy, he says with a grin. Feed one child, and the others stop throwing rocks for at least a minute. The apprentice rolls his eyes but smiles. You get the feeling this is the closest thing to affection they'll ever show each other. The baker leans against the counter, watching the dough rest again. Strange thing about this job, he says, voice soft now. You spend half your life waiting for something to grow in the dark. You never see it happen, you just trust it does. You nod. There's a quiet wisdom in that, something that feels both ancient and modern. He gestures toward the oven. That's why we talk to it, he adds. To remind it we're here. Otherwise, the silence gets too loud. The clock bell outside rings noon, deep and slow. The sound echoes through the narrow streets, bouncing off stone and smoke. The baker closes his eyes for a second, listening. You hear that? He murmurs. That's time passing. Everything we do fits inside that sound. He opens the oven door, heat washing out in a golden wave. Inside, the loaves glow softly, their tops cracking open like small, sleepy smiles. Perfect, he whispers. You realize you've barely moved for half an hour, lulled by the rhythm, the light, the hum of heat. The fire pops once, and the baker smiles like it just told him a secret. Bread, he says, pulling out the first loaf, is the only thing in this world that forgives you for dropping it. He sets it on the rack to rye, cool. And the crust crackles again soft, whispering, like it remembers your name. And as the afternoon deepens outside, you feel yourself drifting slightly, caught between warmth and thought. The baker hums, the fire sighs, the bread listens. Somewhere in that harmony, the world feels safe enough to rest. By late afternoon, the sunlight has grown tired. It leans lazily across the rooftops, slipping through cracks in the shutters like a cat that doesn't want to leave but also doesn't want to be noticed. Inside the bakery, the air hums with the warm rhythm of cooling loaves and the faint hiss of embers settling. You're starting to understand the daily cycle of this place, how everything that rises must also rest. The baker wipes his hands on his apron again, a habit that clearly accomplishes nothing, and surveys the shelves of fresh bread. Each loaf sits proudly, as though it's been waiting centuries for this one quiet applause. He glances toward the door. "Evenings, when the gossip starts," he says. "And trust me, nothing travels faster than hot bread." Sure enough, a few familiar faces begin to wander in neighbors, vendors. One man, who probably hasn't bought a loaf in months, but still insists on sampling every batch for quality control. The baker humors him with the kind of tolerance usually reserved for saints and tax collectors. The woman from the fish market enters next, smelling faintly of the sea and carrying a basket full of glistening scales. "Evening, Tom," she says to the baker. "Heard your loaves rose higher today. Something in the river?" He shrugs. "Maybe it's divine intervention." "Or rats," she replies dryly. "Same difference." Everyone laughs. The air thickens with that kind of laughter that belongs to people too familiar to be polite. As you stand near the door, you catch snippets of talk, rumors about the new priest, complaints about the price of salt, and a debate about whether ghosts can knead dough, apparently. Opinions are divided. "Once," the baker says between sales, "a miller swore he saw a loaf rise by itself in the night. Said it had eyes," the fishmonger snorts. "So do I, when I drink enough ale." The apprentice chuckles and slides another loaf onto the counter. He's getting faster now, more confident, though still managing to look perpetually unimpressed. There's a gentle energy in the room, the kind that hums at the edge of exhaustion. You can feel the weight of the day, softened by warmth and familiarity. The bread keeps disappearing into cloth bags and baskets, traded for coins or gossip or promises of next time. And then, something curious happens. A young monk enters, hood drawn, face half in shadow. He moves with the careful steps of someone who either has great respect or great secrets. When he speaks, his voice is calm but deliberate. "Brother Thomas, I've come for the midnight loaves." The baker stiffens slightly. "Already?" "It's early. The abbot wants them blessed before Compline," the monk says. You catch a flicker of expression across the baker's face, something between annoyance and superstition. "You know they're not ready," he says. "The dough hasn't risen." The monk shrugs, gaze steady. He says to trust in God. God can raise the dead. Surely he can raise bread. It's an argument only someone who doesn't bake could make. The apprentice bites back a grin. "Tell your abbot," the baker says slowly, "that if God wants bread, he's welcome to help knead it." The monk doesn't flinch. He simply nods, leaves a small bag of coins on the counter, and says, "May your oven never go cold." Then he's gone, the door creaking shut behind him. The silence that follows is thick, the kind that sticks to walls. The apprentice breaks it first. "Does he always talk like that?" "Only when he wants something free," the baker mutters. Then, after a pause, "Still, I'll make an extra batch tonight, just in case God's in the mood for bread." You can't help but smile at the weary faith in that statement, part reverence, part sarcasm, all survival. Historians still debate whether medieval monasteries truly believed bread baked before dawn held special blessing, or if it was just a way to ensure breakfast arrived early. Either way, night baking became a sacred rhythm in many towns, part ritual, part necessity. The baker looks toward the dimming sky. "If you're still awake later," he says to you, "you'll see it the best part, the hour when the city sleeps, and only the ovens breathe." You nod. You already know you'll stay. Outside, the marketplace has quieted. The last vendors are packing up, chickens tucked under arms like reluctant merchandise. The light fades from gold to grey, and the smell of roasting meat drifts from somewhere down the street. Bells toll in the distance, marking the shift from day to dusk. Inside, the baker begins clearing the table for the night's work. The apprentice yawns but obeys without question. The last customers murmur good night, and the door closes softly behind them. For the first time in hours, the bakery feels empty, but not lonely, just still. You sit quietly, watching as the baker mixes a new bowl of water and flour. The sound of his hands stirring echoes softly through the room, blending with the low crackle of the hearth. Outside, the first star appears above the crooked rooftops. You follow it with your eyes, thinking how many bakers through history have seen the same one and whispered something to their dough under its light. The baker hums again, the same tune as before. You can almost hear words hiding in it, something like gratitude or resignation. The day exhales. The bread sleeps. The night begins to rise. Night comes slowly, as if the sky is shy about replacing the day. The marketplace falls quiet first, then the alleys, then even the cats. The only sounds left are the occasional creak of a shutter, the sigh of wind through chimneys, and the faint rhythmic pulse from inside the bakery, the sound of dough meeting table again, and again, and again. You're back beside the hearth, watching the baker prepare the midnight loaves. The firelight paints everything in shades of amber and shadow. The baker's movements are slower now, more deliberate. His sleeves are rolled high, his forearms dusted white, his fingers working the dough like he's trying to remember something old. The apprentice fights sleep at the table, head bobbing like a candle flame in a draught. "You can rest," the baker says without looking up. "Bread doesn't care if you're tired." The boy blinks. "It does if I drop it." "Then don't." You can tell this is their usual bedtime routine, a tired argument carried out with affection disguised as irritation. The baker kneads in silence for a while. The fire crackles softly, and the smell of yeast and wood smoke fills the room, richer now, darker. You realize that this is the hour when time slows down, when the city sleeps and the people who feed it begin again. "Listen," the baker says suddenly. You hold your breath. There's a sound beneath everything, faint, almost too soft to hear. A low, bubbling hum, like something alive whispering in its sleep. "The dough," he says. "It's breathing." He's right. The sound is real, air escaping, yeast working, life unfolding invisibly in the dark. "That's why we talk to it," he adds, his voice quiet. "Because it talks back. You just have to listen." You watch his hands move, press, fold, turn. There's a rhythm to it, slow and sure. It's the same rhythm that's existed for centuries, unchanged except for the names of the people who perform it. He gestures toward a small wooden spoon resting on a shelf. "See that? That spoon's been used by every baker before. Me. Wood soaks up memory. Every loaf I make has a bit of theirs in it." It's an oddly comforting thought, the idea that history might taste faintly of itself. Historians still debate whether yeast starters or shared tools truly carried flavor through generations, but they agree that medieval kitchens were places where time itself felt circular. Every dawn, every loaf, every breath of steam was a return, not a beginning. You notice a mark carved into the side of the oven, a small spiral, the same as the miller's charm. The baker catches your gaze and smiles faintly. "That's my protection. If the bread cracks wrong, I blame the spirits. If it cracks right, I thank them." He pauses, glancing toward the window where the moonlight filters in faintly, painting the flour on the counter silver. You start to wonder, after enough years, whether we're baking the bread or whether it's baking us. You ask what he means. He shrugs. "It changes us, doesn't it? Our hands, our patience, even our sleep. We live by its timing. The dough decides when we rest. The oven decides when we eat. We just follow orders." The apprentice, half asleep, mumbles, "Maybe the bread's the boss." "Exactly," says the baker, and lets out a soft laugh. Outside, the city is silent. The stars blink faintly between wisps of smoke from nearby chimneys. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolls once, not to announce anything, but just to remind the night that it exists. You glance at the baker's hands again, rough, careful, confident. There's a quiet beauty in how certain he is of this motion. It's not showy. It's survival turned graceful. He dusts the counter with flour, shapes the last loaf of the batch, and whispers something you can't quite hear. A prayer, maybe, or an apology. When he's done, he places the loaves near the fire to rest. "You can't rush it," he says softly. "Everything that grows does so in its own time. Bread, people, forgiveness, all the same rule." The apprentice finally dozes off, slumped against a sack of flour, snoring quietly. The baker covers him with an old cloak. You notice the tenderness in the gesture, disguised under the rough movements. "He'll learn," the baker says, half to himself. They always do. The bread teaches patience. You sit in silence a while longer. The air hums with warmth and dust, the scent of life suspended in heat. You think about all the hands across history doing this same work in stone ovens, in monasteries, in little wooden shops like this one, whispering to bread as if it were a secret that might answer back. The baker yawns, stretches, then gestures to a small bench by the wall. You can rest here, if you like. The loaves will wake us when they're ready. You nod, leaning back, the wood warm beneath you. He sits too, folding his arms and closing his eyes. The firelight flickers across his face, softening every line. Outside, wind sighs through the street, carrying the faint smell of smoke and river water. Inside, the dough rises quietly, each loaf expanding in the hush like lungs filling with dreams. You let your eyes drift half closed, and the last thing you hear before sleep is the soft murmur of the baker's voice, low, steady, speaking to his bread like an old friend who's almost ready to wake. When you wake, it's still dark, not night dark, but that strange bluish grey that lives between hours. The fire has slumped into a quiet bed of embers, glowing like buried moons. The air is warm, but faintly sweet, filled with the smell of loaves that have finished dreaming. The baker is already awake. Of course he is. He's crouched near the oven door, peering inside with the seriousness of a priest checking for miracles. His hair is damp with heat, his face shining softly. They're ready, he whispers. He opens the door, and the first wave of warmth rolls across the room. A breath of toasted air that smells like comfort, patience, and a little bit of smoke. He slides a loaf onto the paddle and lifts it out, cradling it like something newborn. The crust glows faintly, golden brown, whispering tiny cracks as it cools. Steam curls upward, disappearing into the dim light. You hear that? He says softly. That's the sound of success. The apprentice groans awake, from his corner, rubbing his eyes. I dreamed the bread was talking again, he mumbles. It was, the baker replies. You just don't speak its language yet. You smile, still half asleep yourself. The world feels smaller now, like everything has gathered in this single warm room, the fire, the loaves, the three of you, and the slow tick of time trying not to disturb the silence. The baker sets each loaf on the table, lining them up like a parade of quiet soldiers. Their shapes aren't perfect, some lean, some bulge, one looks vaguely like it's making a face, but they all share that same glow of effort, fulfilled. He steps back, satisfied. There, he says, proof that patience works. Sometimes. You sit beside the table, watching the light shift through the window. Outside, the sky is beginning to show hints of pink. The first birds are waking, confused but optimistic. Somewhere in the distance, a cart creaks, the early bread deliveries beginning. Again, the apprentice yawns loudly. So now we rest? The baker shakes his head. Now we wait for customers who'll complain it's too hot to eat. He says it with fond sarcasm, the kind of humour that only comes from total surrender to life's absurdities. Historians still debate whether night baking emerged out of practical need to supply monasteries and morning markets, or from a spiritual desire to bake in the quiet hours between days. Some accounts from 14th century France describe bakers as night's last guardians, tending the fire until dawn so that others could wake to the smell of light turned edible. You can see why. There's something holy about this hour, no prayers, no noise, just warmth and work and the faint hum of yeast still alive inside the loaves. The baker breaks one open, the crust crackling like a tiny thunderclap. The inside glows faintly golden in the firelight, steam sighing upward. This one's for the monks, he says, tearing off a piece and tasting it first. He chews thoughtfully. Blessed enough, he decides. The apprentice laughs. If they don't like it, tell them to pray harder. The baker grins, tearing the rest into halves. Share, he says. You take a piece still warm, soft, alive. The texture is chewy, the flavour deep, almost smoky. It's astonishing how much soul can live in something so simple. The baker nods toward the window. You hear that? You listen. Outside, the faint bells of the monastery begin to ring slow, measured, like heartbeats through fog. That's our cue, he says. He wraps the loaves in cloth and places them in a wicker basket. The apprentice follows, balancing the load like a sleepy acrobat. You step out into the street together. The world is misty, silver grey, the kind of dawn that feels like it's holding its breath. The cobblestones glisten from a night's dew. Smoke curls upward from chimneys like gentle thoughts. The baker walks, Slowly, basket on his arm, boots tapping softly. You follow close behind. Everything feels softened, blurred like a dream that hasn't quite decided to end. As you pass under the city's archway, you notice faint carvings on the stone wheat sheaves, suns and spirals. Old symbols, the baker says. Reminders that life turns, again and again. Wheat grows, gets ground, becomes bread, then dust. Everything feeds the next thing. He looks up at the fading stars, even us. There's no sadness in his tone, just quiet certainty, the kind that comes from doing something ancient and ordinary enough to become immortal. By the time you reach the monastery gate, the sky has brightened. The bells fade, replaced by the sound of footsteps inside the monks coming to open the door. The baker places the basket at the threshold and knocks once. A young monk appears, the same one from earlier. He nods silently, takes the bread, and whispers, "Peace to your fire." Baker answers, "And to your hunger." It sounds like an old exchange, older than either of them, passed down through generations like the bread itself. As you turn back toward the city, the sun finally edges above the rooftops, spilling light down the street. The baker squints, rubbing his neck. Every morning, he mutters, the sun shows up late and still gets all the credit. You laugh softly. It's the perfect kind of joke. Tired, true, and oddly comforting. He looks at you, smiles faintly, and says, "Come on, the dough won't rest itself." And just like that, the night ends, and the day begins again. Another turn of the endless wheel, warm and human, steady as breath. The sun is awake now, though it seems to regret the decision. The light drifts lazily through the fog, touching rooftops and chimney smoke like it's trying to remember why it came in the first place. The river glitters faintly, pretending to be clean. The city stirs again, slower this time, like a giant stretching sore muscles. You and the baker make your way back through the streets, past the first chatter of merchants and the clatter of buckets being filled. A group of children chase a rolling hoop, laughing the way only people without taxes can. The baker's steps are steady but tired, the rhythm of a man who's been awake since yesterday. "Strange thing," he says as you walk. "We spend all night feeding the city, and by noon, nobody remembers who did it." He doesn't sound bitter, just factual, like a man reciting the weather. You pass a beggar at the corner, holding out a wooden bowl. The baker pauses, breaks off a piece of bread from the morning's batch, and places it inside. The beggar's hands shake as he whispers, "Blessings of Saint Honoré." The baker smiles faintly. "Tell him to send flour next time." You both laugh quietly and move on. The sound fades behind you, the kind of laugh that carries warmth longer than echo. By the time you reach the bakery, the light has changed from grey to gold. The city has remembered its chaos. Carts rumble past. A horse snorts disapproval at a goose. Someone drops a bucket, curses, and immediately apologizes to God. Inside the shop, the air smells of everything: smoke, crust, sleep, and relief. The apprentice is already sweeping again, humming a tune that somehow sounds both cheerful and resentful. "Another day done," the baker says, though it's barely begun. He lowers himself onto a stool with the slow dignity of collapsing furniture. On the counter sits a single loaf, slightly overbaked, its crust darker than the rest. "That one's the watcher," he says. "The what?" you ask. "The watcher. Every day, we keep one loaf aside. It stays until the next batch is ready. Make sure the oven doesn't get lonely." You stare at it. It's a plain round loaf, cracked like old parchment. But there's something oddly dignified about it, as if it knows it's been given a role. Historians still debate whether watcher loaves were real practice or myth, but in some medieval towns, it's recorded that bakers left one loaf uncut overnight to absorb misfortune or to stand as a token for those who died hungry. The next morning, it would be buried, burned, or quietly fed to birds. The baker glances at it now, resting his chin in his palm. "Every oven remembers," he says softly. "The bread, the hands, the hunger. We just keep it company." The apprentice mutters, "Creepy." The baker chuckles. "Everything worth remembering is." He leans back, eyes half closed. "You ever notice," he says, "that bread smells like home even when it's not yours?" You nod. "You've been thinking it for hours, that the scent has followed you through time. weaving comfort into every corner. Maybe that's why people always forgave bakers their quirks and their debts. Bread, after all, was forgiveness you could eat. The apprentice finishes sweeping and sits on a sack of flour. You know, he says, if bread could talk for real, it'd probably complain about being poked all day. Probably, the baker says, smiling. But it'd still come back tomorrow. You step to the doorway. The morning sunlight cuts across the street, hitting the bakery's sign, a carved loaf with the faint image of Saint Honoré beneath it. Dust drifts lazily in the beam, like tiny crumbs of gold. From the corner of your eye, you see the baker lean forward again, elbows on knees, staring at the oven. Every time I think I've seen the last loaf, he murmurs, I remember there's always another waiting to rise. There's no drama in his tone, just calm certainty, the kind that anchors a world built on repetition. He looks up at you, eyes half tired, half content. Get some rest, he says. The next batch starts after sunset. You hesitate, but he gestures toward the door. Go on, you've seen what a day looks like here. Tomorrow will be exactly the same and completely different. Outside, the sunlight feels warmer now, the noise of the city returning like a tide. You glance back once more. Through the window, you see him standing beside the oven, running a hand over the wooden paddle, his shadow stretching long in the light. You can almost imagine his whisper to the watcher loaf, as soft and familiar as breath. Stay warm. Keep watch. I'll be back before the fire forgets my name. And as you walk down the narrow street, the sound of the bakery fades into the heartbeat of the city. Steady, alive, endless. The wheel turns again. By the time evening returns, the air feels heavy again, that rich, tired weight that comes after too much sun and too many footsteps. The baker's street glows with the faint orange of lanterns, and you can hear the murmur of supper drifting through open shutters, spoons clinking, prayers murmured, gossip reheated for the third time. Inside the bakery, the ovens breathe again. The day's ashes have been swept away, replaced by a new flame that flickers like it's remembering how to be alive. The baker stands before it, sleeves rolled, his face half in firelight, half in shadow. Strange thing, he says quietly, watching the wood catch. The world changes outside, but the fire's always the same. You settle onto the bench near the wall. The warmth settles into your bones like memory. The apprentice is back 2 more awake than usual, though just barely. He's kneading dough with the stubborn focus of someone who doesn't trust his own hands yet. The baker watches him. Gentle, he says. You're not punishing it, the boy frowns. Feels like it deserves it. Don't we all? The baker mutters, half smiling. You can tell this is how they teach here, through rhythm, repetition, and dry humor. No one gives speeches about patience. They just live it one loaf at a time. Outside, thunder rumbles faintly in the distance. Rain threatens, lazy but certain. The city is used to it. People shout to pull laundry inside. The air smells like dust, remembering it was once water. The baker wipes his hands and reaches for a small clay cup near the window. Rain means slow rise, he says. The air gets heavy, dough takes its time. He takes a sip, grimaces. Also means wine tastes like regret. The apprentice snorts. Does it ever not? Only on feast days. The oven crackles, interrupting them like an opinionated old friend. The light grows deeper, warmer. The shadows stretch along the walls, long, slow, alive. You realize that night baking isn't just about bread. It's about being awake when the rest of the world isn't. There's a strange peace in it, a kind of borrowed stillness. The baker lifts a round of dough from the trough. It's soft and trembling, full of small air pockets like sleeping thoughts. He shapes it on the table with steady hands. Every loaf's got its own personality, he says. Some rise easy, some fight you the whole way. He nods toward the apprentice. Like people. The boy rolls his eyes, but he's smiling. Does that make you yeast? Worse, says the baker. Flour. I get everywhere. You can't help laughing. It's the kind of weary humor that makes you feel closer to the world. As he works, the baker hums under his breath again the same half-song from before. You recognize it now. It isn't a melody so much as a rhythm, the sound of the wheel, the fire, the pulse of bread rising. You wonder if every baker knows this tune, or if it's just something the work teaches over time. He slides the shaped loaves into the oven. closes the iron door with a gentle clang, and leans against the wall. The firelight paints his face gold. "There was a time," he says after a while, "when bakers used to test the heat with their hands. Just wave it inside and guess. If you didn't burn, it was too cold." Sounds like a bad system, you say. "It worked," he says, grinning faintly, "most of the time." Historians still debate whether early bakers had accurate methods for temperature or just a remarkable tolerance for pain. Some records mention sprinkling flour into the oven. If it browned slowly, it was ready. Others, less practical, involve prayers to St. Lawrence, the patron saint of cooks, who, ironically, was martyred on a grill. "You mention this?" and the baker chuckles. "Ah, yes, St. Lawrence, the only man who could say, 'I'm done on this side,' and mean it." The apprentice groans at the joke, which is exactly the reaction the baker was hoping for. Outside, the rain finally begins, a soft tapping at first, then heavier. It patters on the window and slides down the glass like melted time. The sound fills the bakery, blending with the crackle of fire. The world beyond feels washed away, leaving only warmth, bread, and breath. You realize you've begun to measure time differently here. Not in minutes or bells, but in cycles of dough, the rise, the bake, the cool, the repeat. It's a quiet clock, one that only exists between heartbeat and hunger. The baker lifts a lid from the cooling rack and smiles. "Perfect," he murmurs. "Rain always helps. Bread loves melancholy." You sit back, eyes half closed, listening to the symphony of storm and oven water and fire, working in gentle argument. Somewhere deep inside, the city sleeps, but this place hums softly on. The baker lowers his voice, almost to a whisper. "They say bread remembers who watched it rise. That's why we stay awake." He looks at the loaves, glowing faintly in the light. You listen long enough, you start to believe it. And in this small room, while thunder mutters and the smell of new bread fills the dark, you find it hard to disagree. The storm passes in its own time, not quickly, not slowly, just with that deliberate pace rain seems to enjoy. It leaves the city rinsed and drowsy. Droplets slide down the window panes like tiny messengers carrying stories back to the sea. Inside the bakery, the world has reduced itself to warmth and waiting. The smell is impossible to describe, something between roasted grain and forgiveness. The baker moves quietly, checking the loaves one by one, tapping each with his finger the way a doctor might test a pulse. The apprentice sits cross-legged on the floor, drawing little spirals in spilled flour. He looks up when one of the loaves lets out a soft crack. "They're talking again." "They never stopped," the baker murmurs. "We just stopped listening." He takes a loaf from the oven, its crust blistered and beautiful, and rests it on the wooden rack. Steam curls upward, catches in the light, and disappears. The air is still heavy from the rain, and every breath tastes faintly of smoke and comfort. "You ever wonder," the apprentice says, "what people will eat in the future?" The baker pauses. "Probably something that doesn't take all night. Something you can just click on." You laugh softly, and the baker joins you. "Bread by button," he says. "No waiting, no work, no prayers to Saint Honoré, just warmth without patience." Sounds like magic. "Or tragedy," you suggest. He grins. "Both, maybe." He turns to check the fire again. The coals are glowing steadily, deep orange under the ash. "We don't bake because it's easy," he says, almost to himself. "We bake because it reminds us to slow down, to notice the heat, the smell, the small things that can't be rushed." The apprentice frowns. "Like sermons?" "No," the baker says. "Like breathing." The oven door creaks. Another wave of warmth fills the room, chasing away the last hint of damp air. You can hear the faint hiss of the rain outside easing into silence. The world, for once, seems satisfied. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers saw their craft as holy or simply necessary. But in certain towns, records show that bakers were excused from night prayers, their work itself counted as devotion. It's hard to argue with that theology. Making bread is half miracle, half endurance. The baker slices a small heel off the cooling loaf and hands it to you. "Careful," he warns. "It's got the night still inside it." You bite in. The crust crackles, the crumbs soft and alive. There's a quiet sweetness beneath the smoke, the kind of flavor that only comes from hours spent awake while everyone else sleeps. He nods approvingly. Good. It tastes honest. Honest? You ask? He shrugs. You can't fake bread. It always tells the truth about your hands. If you rush it, it sulks. If you forget it, it burns. If you treat it right, it forgives you. Not many things in this world work that way. The apprentice wipes his floury fingers on his tunic. Does that mean the bread likes us tonight? The baker looks at the rose cooling on the rack. It hasn't cursed us yet. You notice a small loaf sitting apart from the others, round, plain, a little overdone. The baker catches your eye and smiles faintly. That one's for the rain, he says. You always give back to what kept you company. He opens the door and steps out into the damp street. You follow. The air smells different now, washed, alive. The puddles reflect the lanterns like broken stars. He sets the small loaf on the edge of the gutter, near where the runoff from the roof trickles down toward the river. The water gives. The fire gives, he says quietly. So we give too. The apprentice shivers beside you. You think the river's hungry? The baker smiles without answering. He closes the door gently and returns to the warmth inside. You sit back down on the bench, watching the fire. The rain loaf sits outside, slowly soaking, slowly surrendering. You imagine crumbs floating downstream, feeding fish that have no idea they've eaten a blessing. The baker wipes his hands again, unnecessarily. When I was a boy, he says, my mother used to say, bread remembers kindness. Every crumb carries it somewhere else. You glance toward the door. Maybe that's true. He nods. Maybe it's why the world hasn't burned down yet. For a long moment, none of you speak. The only sounds are the slow tick of cooling loaves and the faint dripping from the eaves outside. The air glows gold, then fades to embers. The baker finally breaks the silence. You should sleep, he says softly. There's another dawn coming soon, and it'll want company. You nod. The bench feels softer now. The room is warm. The scent of bread clings to everything. Wood, air, memory. And as your eyes close, you think you hear the faintest whisper from the oven, low and steady, like an old friend saying goodnight. Rise again. Always rise. You wake to silence, not the kind that's empty, but the kind that's earned. The fire has gone quiet, just a soft amber glow under the ash. The air is thick with the scent of baked earth, faintly sweet, faintly smoky, the smell of something that once lived in the dark and found its way into light. The baker is sitting by the window, elbows on knees, staring at the grey sky outside. His expression is calm but distant, a man measuring time not by hours, but by loaves. The apprentice is still asleep in the corner, head resting on a sack of flour, one hand curled as if kneading in his dreams. The baker glances at you. You hear that? You listen. There's nothing at first. Then you notice it, a single, quiet drip from the roof into a puddle outside. Steady, almost metronomic. That's the sound of morning trying to convince itself it matters, he says. You can't help smiling. You always talk like that before breakfast. He shrugs. Only before the world wakes up. He rises and walks toward the oven, stirring the coals with the paddle. Sparks flutter upward, brief and bright. We'll start again soon, he says. Always do. He pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, as if remembering something half lost. There's an old saying among bakers, he continues. You never bake the same loaf twice. The hands are different, the air's different, even the fire forgets itself. But you pretend it's the same. That's how you stay sane. You think about that for a while. The idea that sameness is a kind of kindness, a story you tell yourself so life doesn't feel like chaos. Outside, the mist is lifting. A faint gold begins to brush the rooftops, the shy beginning of sunlight that feels more like apology than warmth. The baker opens the window a little, letting in the smell of wet stone and chimney smoke. People always think bread smells like comfort, he says. But really, it smells like work. You nod, watching the find. Light creep across the table, illuminating the flour in slow, drifting motes. Work can be comfort too, you say. He glances at you, considering that, and finally nods. If you do it long enough. The apprentice stirs, yawns, and squints at the light. How long was I out? Long enough for the bread to judge you, the baker says without looking up. The boy groans and sits up, rubbing his face. Feels like I swallowed half the flour in my sleep. You probably did, the baker says. Congratulations, you're 1% bread now. It's a sleepy kind of humor, and it settles warmly between you all. Historians still debate how apprenticeships worked in medieval bakeries, whether boys lived with their masters or returned home after each day's labor. But most agree it was a life of long hours and little rest, punctuated by lessons disguised as sarcasm. The apprentice ties his hair back and begins to scrub the counter. You think anyone will ever remember us? He asks suddenly. The baker looks up. You mean by name? Yeah. The baker shakes his head. Not likely, but maybe by smell. The boy blinks. By smell. Every loaf carries memory. Maybe centuries from now, someone will open a bakery and, for a second, smell what we smelled. That'll be enough. You glance at the bread cooling on the rack. Steam still rises faintly, curling like soft handwriting that disappears before it's read. You imagine a far future modern kitchens, clean ovens, people who never once had to whisper to dough to make it behave, and you realize he might be right. Some memories survive only through the senses, through taste and scent and heat. The baker takes a small knife and carves a mark into the crust of one loaf. A spiral, the same as before. There, he says. Now it remembers. He places it aside on a separate shelf. For the next storm, he explains. You stand beside him, looking out the window. The sun is higher now, though still pale. A few early vendors begin to set up their stalls again, voices faint through the glass. The city is beginning its daily resurrection. Strange, you say. We wake, we work, we sleep, and it still feels like something new. That's because you're not counting in loaves yet, the baker replies. Once you do, you stop expecting novelty. You start finding beauty in repetition. He turns toward the door, unlatches it, and lets in the first true breath of morning. The air is sharp, cool, and clean, filled with the smell of rain-soaked wood and baking bread. The apprentice stretches and mutters, You going to start talking to the sun next? The baker smiles. If it listens. For a moment, you all just stand there, three shapes in the warm light, surrounded by the ghosts of heat and history. You realize that this is how people have always survived. By tending small fires, by making something to feed the next day, by pretending that permanence can exist in dough. The baker leans against the doorframe. You see, he says quietly, bread's not just food. It's a truce between hunger and hope. You look around the room, at the oven, the ash, the loaves, the sleeping smell of it all, and you understand what he means. Outside, the first church bell rings, slow and low, as if the city is taking a deep breath. The baker turns back to his table. Well, he says, rolling up his sleeves again, the truce doesn't keep itself. And as he begins to knead the first dough of the new day, the rhythm starts over soft, steady, patient, the ancient heartbeat of a world that keeps rising, even when no one's watching. The morning gathers itself into motion again, quietly but surely, as though the city has decided to rehearse the same symphony one more time. You can hear the muffled thump of carts on cobblestones, merchants muttering to their mules, the distant church bells dragging, light into the air. The baker's hands are back at work. You can almost see time stretch and fold under them, the same gestures that have existed since someone first noticed fire could turn hunger into comfort. His fingers move with sleepy precision, pressing, folding, coaxing. The apprentice, now fully awake, leans against the counter with the exaggerated weariness only youth can pull off. How many loaves today? He asks. Enough, says the baker. Too few, and people complain. Too many, and God laughs. He says it with a straight face, but you sense the humor underneath. You've learned that here. Irony isn't rebellion, it's survival. The apprentice begins shaping small rolls, clumsy but improving. You watch as he pinches the seams shut with surprising tenderness, as if even imperfection deserves a little care. Not bad, the baker says. You're getting the hang of it. Finally, the boy mutters, after only 100,000 tries. That's what it takes to get good at anything worth doing, the baker replies. 100,000 tries and one good joke. Outside, A small crowd starts to gather, a few women with baskets, a man selling onions, two children arguing about whose turn it is to carry the bread home. The baker opens the door fully, and the smell spills out like a soft invitation. It's remarkable how quickly the scent changes the air. You can almost watch the tension leave people's shoulders as they step closer, breathing in that warm, toasted calm. Historians still debate whether the smell of bread has measurable effects on the human brain. Modern scientists say it triggers dopamine, nostalgia, comfort. But medieval people already knew this. They just called it grace. The first customer, an elderly woman with a scarf tied neatly under her chin, places 3 small coins on the counter. "Morning, Tom," she says. "Rain's gone. Smells better now." The baker nods. "That's because the sky baked too long." She laughs, that deep, belly laugh that feels older than the city itself. "You've got jokes for everything." He shrugs. "If I stop laughing, the bread stops rising." She leaves with a loaf under her arm, and you notice she doesn't look back. People rarely do. They trust the baker will still be here tomorrow. They trust the oven more than they trust the sunrise. The apprentice leans on the counter. "She's been buying here since before I was born." "Bread loyalty," says the baker. "More binding than marriage." The boy grins. "You'd know?" The baker chuckles softly, brushing flour off his sleeves. "I'm married to the oven. It complains less." You watch the rhythm of exchange continue. Bread for coin, coin for quiet satisfaction. Each loaf leaves the counter lighter than it arrived, as though it knows it's heading somewhere it belongs. The baker wraps the last sale, then sighs. Every morning, it's the baker. "Same," he says. "And somehow that's the best part." You glance toward the oven. "Don't you ever tire of it?" He pauses, considering. "Sometimes. But then, I remember the moment you pull a loaf from the fire, and it sings. That never gets old." He gestures toward the window, where sunlight pours in now, clean and full. Dust dances in the air like crumbs of light. "Besides," he adds, "some of us were built for slow miracles." The apprentice sets down his rag. "Slow miracles?" The baker nods. "Things that only work if you stay long enough to notice." There's silence after that, not awkward, just soft. Outside, the morning noise grows, then fades. You realize how much the world happens between these 4 walls. It's like time itself stops to warm its hands by the oven before continuing on. The baker sits back, stretching his arms with a sigh that sounds almost content. "You'll see," he says to the boy. "One day, you'll look up, and your hands will know what to do before you do. That's when you've become part of the rhythm, not the other way around." The apprentice looks doubtful, but he nods. The baker smiles faintly. "It's not a bad life," he adds. "It just happens slower than most people notice." Outside, the bell from the monastery tolls again, once, twice, 3 times. You count the sound between the beats of silence. The baker's gaze drifts toward the open door. "Somewhere," he says softly. "Someone else is starting their oven right now. Another fire, another loaf, another day pretending to be new." He chuckles, shaking his head. The world doesn't change much, really. Just the hands that keep it warm. You look at his hands, strong, worn, faintly dusted with flour that never seems to wash off completely, and you think he might be right. He stands, stretches, and says with that gentle dryness you've grown used to, "Now, unless you plan to eat air, we'd better. To make another batch." The apprentice groans, and the baker grins. And so it begins again, water poured, flour clouding the air. The same steady rhythm. A hymn in motion, soft as heartbeat, old as hunger. The city outside can have its noise. In here, the only sound that matters is the quiet conversation between heat and patience. The fire answers first, and the dough listens. Afternoon returns with a kind of lazy certainty. The clouds drift apart, letting narrow blades of sunlight slice across the cobblestones. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls the hour, but it's hard to tell which one. Time here feels like it's been kneaded flat, folded and folded, until it no longer has edges. Inside, the bakery hums with the slow pulse of routine. The air feels thicker now, heavy with heat, and that distinct perfume of baked grain that could make even the most cynical poet sentimental. The loaves line the shelves like golden relics. each one slightly different, each one wearing the same proud glow of survival. The baker wipes his hands again, though at this point it's more ritual than necessity. Afternoons are when bread tastes best, he says. Not too hot, not too fresh, just awake enough to remember the fire. He slices one open, the crust crackling, releasing a curl of steam that smells faintly of nuts and smoke. He hands you a piece. It's dense, warm, slightly sour, the kind of flavor that anchors you to the moment, whether you like it or not. The apprentice takes a piece too, holding it up to the light. Funny, he says, how something so simple takes so long. The baker chuckles. Everything worth anything does. You'll learn. He looks out the window. The street outside has softened. The morning rush has drifted into the midday lull. A few women carry baskets home from the market. A dog naps in a patch of sun. Even the air seems to have given up arguing with itself. The baker leans against the counter. This is my favorite part, he says. The city quiets down just enough to remember it's human. You notice a small painting hanging near the oven, a faded image of Saint-Honoré again, halo cracked, face half lost to soot. Someone has tied a fresh ribbon around the frame. You still pray to him? You ask. Pray? The baker says, half laughing. No, but I talk to him. He's the only one who understands the hours. Does he answer? Only when something burns. The apprentice snorts, but the baker's tone has softened. It's strange, he says. How faith changes. When I was young, I used to think miracles were thunderclaps and halos. Now, I think they're the small things, like when the dough rises after you were sure it wouldn't. You nod. A quiet kind of miracle. Exactly, he smiles faintly. The kind that happens even when you forget to deserve it. Outside, a boy runs past, shouting something about a festival in the square. The baker raises an eyebrow. Ah, of course. St. Martin's feast. The whole city will be drunk by sunset. The apprentice perks up. Can we close early? The baker gives him a look. We'll close when the dough says we can. He walks to the table, uncovering a new mound of dough resting beneath a damp cloth. It's doubled in size, soft and trembling. See? It's polite enough to wait. The apprentice grumbles but smiles, rolling his sleeves again. Historians still debate how much of medieval baking was guided by science versus superstition. In truth, it was both equal measures of patience and faith. Bakers read the air the way sailors read the wind. A cold morning meant slow rise. A humid one, chaos. To them, yeast was a living mystery, as temperamental as any god. The baker kneads slowly, almost meditatively. You know, he says, sometimes I think we're not feeding people at all. We're feeding time, giving it shape, flavor, reason. You tilt your head. Feeding time? He nods. Every day starts as nothing. Then we mix, heat, wait, and by the end, something exists that didn't before. Then it's gone again, eaten, forgotten. But for a few hours, the world feels full. He presses the dough one last time and folds it gently. That's enough meaning for me. The apprentice looks up. And when you're gone, who keeps feeding time then? The baker shrugs. Someone else with flour on their hands. He sets the dough aside to rest, then wipes the sweat from his forehead. The trick isn't to last forever. The trick is to leave the oven warm enough for the next person. The boy looks at him, and for the first time, doesn't argue. You can feel the day stretching toward evening again, the light thinning, the edges of shadow sharpening on the walls. The rhythm of the bakery slows, but doesn't stop. The fire burns low and steady, like it knows it's being watched. The baker pours 3 cups of watered wine. To patience, he says. The apprentice lifts his cup. To sleep. You add softly. To bread that remembers. The baker smiles at that. Ah, the most important kind. You all drink. The warmth slides down, simple and human. Outside, the faint sound of music begins to rise, the festival starting somewhere down the street. Laughter, tambourines, the kind of joy that always sounds slightly off-key but sincere. The baker doesn't move to join them. He just listens for a moment, the fire flickering in his eyes. Let them celebrate, he says quietly. We already have our feast. He gestures toward the loaves cooling on the table, simple, golden, alive with scent and story. And as the music swells outside, the three of you sit in the calm between worlds, the noise of the city beyond, the hush of the bakery within, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will rise again, exactly as it should. By dusk, the sky turns the color of overbaked crust, deep amber sliding into smoke. The festival, sounds drift closer, carried on the wind. The pulse of a drum, a flute wheezing out an optimistic tune, laughter that spills and stumbles like cheap wine. The whole city smells faintly of roasted meat and rain-soaked candles. Inside the bakery, the fire glows steady and low, content with itself. The last batch of loaves cools on the racks, steam rising like small ghosts. The baker stands at the door, watching the street fill with lanterns, the apprentice hovering beside him like a dog torn between duty and curiosity. "Go on then," the baker says finally, waving a hand. "Go see what nonsense the world's up to tonight." The boy grins, barely managing a thanks before darting into the evening. His footsteps fade quickly into the rhythm of drums. The baker shakes his head, smiling to himself. He'll be back when the hangover starts. You watch him return to his stool near the oven, where he pours himself a small cup of wine and takes a long sip. The sound of rain from the night before has been replaced by the gentle rattle of distant tambourines. "This part," he says quietly, "this is my favorite time of day. The city forgets its troubles for a while. Bread cools, fire rests, and I get to pretend I'm wise." He takes another sip, chuckles softly, and adds, "It's mostly the wine talking." You sit across from him. The heat of the oven hums through the floorboards. Outside, someone shouts about Saint Martin's miracle, how he cut his cloak in half to share it with a beggar. Inside, the baker stretches his arms and sighs. "I'd give half my cloak too, but I only have one oven." You laugh. It's a tired laugh, the kind that sounds like it's been waiting all day to escape. He glances at the loaves on the table. "We baked extra for the poorhouse," he says. "They'll collect it at dawn." Bread that doesn't sell still feeds someone. That's how you balance the scale. Historians still debate whether charity bread, sometimes called God's loaves, was born from faith or practicality. Bakers donated what they couldn't sell to monasteries or hospitals, ensuring goodwill and avoiding waste. Either way, it made the city breathe a little easier. The baker gestures to the loaves. "We call them sleepers, bread that waits for its purpose." You look at them closely. They're not perfect, a few misshapen, one too dark at the edge, but there's something deeply human about their imperfection. Bread that waited too long, like people who nearly lost their chance but didn't. The baker raises his cup. "To the sleepers," he says. You echo him. "To the sleepers." The sound of clinking cups feels softer than the music outside a private festival of its own. For a while, you both just listen to the hum of the street. Laughter swells, then fades. Somewhere, someone starts singing, badly but passionately. You can hear feet stomping in uneven rhythm, the faint jangle of bells. The baker watches the doorway, eyes half-lidded. "You know," he says, "people think bakers miss out on life because we work at night. They don't realize we see a different kind of world, the quiet one." He takes another sip. "When everyone else dreams, we make what they'll wake up to. And then they call it ordinary." He doesn't sound bitter, just curious, like he's been turning the thought over for years. There's something strange about that, isn't there? We make the morning, but never live in it. You nod. "That's what makes it sacred." He smiles faintly. "You talk like a monk." "Maybe I just listen like one," you reply. He chuckles at that, sets his cup down, and leans back against the wall. The fire crackles quietly. "My father used to say the same thing. Bake like you're praying," he'd tell me. "The dough can tell when you don't mean it." He glances at the loaves again. He was right. Bread knows. A silence settles, warm and easy. Outside, the music reaches a crescendo, cheers, clapping, the clatter of mugs. You can almost smell the roasted goose from the square. The baker closes his eyes. It's strange, isn't it? The same fire that cooks your food could burn down your house. Still, we trust it every day. Maybe that's what faith really is. He opens one eye, smirks. Or stupidity. Historians still debate that. You laugh again, quietly. He stands, stretches, and pokes the coals. "All right," he says. "Enough philosophy. Time to bank the fire before it gets ideas." He pushes the embers into a low, steady glow. The light softens, filling the room with the kind of warmth that doesn't demand attention, just presence. He looks around, satisfied. "There," he says softly. "Fire's asleep. Bread's asleep. Maybe the world can rest a bit too." You watch him, one last moment in that half-light, the lines on his face softened by the glow, the small smile of a man who has made peace with repetition. Outside, the festival surges on. Inside, the last spark in the oven sighs and goes still. And for that heartbeat of silence before the next dawn, the world feels perfectly, impossibly full. The night deepens until it feels almost still enough to touch. The festival sounds outside fade into a dull heartbeat, drums muffled by distance, laughter dissolved into the wet air. You can hear the soft hush of wind moving through alleys and the faint clatter of a loose shutter tapping against stone. The bakery is quiet now, not empty, just settled. The warmth from the oven lingers like a memory that refuses to leave. The baker sits by the window again, this time not looking out but simply being still. His shoulders relax for the first time all day, and the air carries that calm, thick, invisible, but real. The apprentice hasn't returned yet. The baker doesn't seem worried. "He'll stumble back before dawn," he says softly, half smiling. "The night always gives back what it borrows." You take a seat across from him. The table between you is scattered with crumbs and traces of flour, tiny constellations of the day's labor. The baker absently runs a fingertip through them, sketching a circle, then a spiral, then another circle again. "That symbol," you say. "You carve it on everything." He glances down. "The old miller showed me. Says it means turning within turning. Life's way of repeating itself until we understand." He wipes the flour away with his palm. "I'm still trying to understand." Outside, a breeze pushes against the door, making it creak faintly as if the night wants to come in but is too polite to insist. The baker stands, opens the door just enough to let in the cool air, and sits back down. The wind carries the faint scent of smoke and rosemary. You both sit there a long time without speaking. The silence isn't heavy, it's patient. You can hear the city breathing in its sleep, a cartwheel rolling in the distance, a dog barking once, then silence again. "Do you ever regret it?" you ask finally. "The hours, the routine?" The baker thinks for a moment. "Sometimes. When I was young, I thought I'd travel. Maybe see the sea. Maybe find a place where bread doesn't rule the day." He smiles faintly. "But I never found a reason to leave. The oven's got a gravity to it. Once it knows your hands, it keeps them." He looks at his palms, rough, cracked, dusted white even now. "These," he says, "used to belong to me. Now they belong to the work." You study his face, tired but steady, lined with the kind of peace that comes from choosing the same small goodness every day. "You know," he says, after a pause, "people think bakers are humble because we feed others first. But really, it's selfish. The smell, the heat, the rhythm, it's its own kind of comfort. You make a loaf, and for a few hours, the world behaves." He glances toward the sleeping oven, until it doesn't. Then you start again. A light rain begins to fall, soft and slow. It patters on the cobblestones and seeps into the hush. The baker closes his eyes and listens. "That's the same sound as kneading," he says. "Water meeting earth, over and over. Makes you wonder if the world's just a giant loaf waiting for the right hands." You smile. "If it is, it's been left to rise too long." He laughs quietly, a single exhale that feels like warmth escaping a crust. "True. But maybe that's what makes it interesting. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers saw rain as a blessing or a nuisance. Some records say they believed it made dough temperamental. Others swore it carried God's blessing into the grain. Either way, the rhythm of work never stopped, because hunger never did. The baker's gaze drifts to the sleepers, the loaves meant for the poorhouse. They sit in neat rows, cooled and waiting. "Funny," he says, "how the bread that costs nothing is always the one that means the most." He stands and walks to them, runs his hand lightly over the crusts. "These loaves," he says quietly, "will end up." in hands that have forgotten what warmth feels like. But they'll remember the smell. It always starts there. He looks at you, eyes soft. Bread is memory, more than food. It reminds people they're still part of something living. You nod, feeling the truth settle somewhere deep. The baker covers the loaves with a cloth. There, he says. Now they can dream too. The rain grows steadier, drumming gently on the roof. You both sit again, watching the fire's last embers pulse faintly. The room feels timeless, like the kind of moment that could exist in any century, any life. The baker speaks once more, voice low. Tomorrow, I'll wake before dawn again. Start the same way. Stir the starter, light the fire, whisper the first words to the dough. He smiles faintly. And maybe, for a few moments, it'll feel like the world's listening. He raises his cup, half filled with cold wine. To all the quiet things that keep turning, he says, you raise yours, too. To the hands that keep them turning. The cups touch softly, a small sound, perfectly round. And outside, as the rain continues its slow, steady rhythm, the city sleeps beneath the scent of unseen bread rising again, somewhere in the dark. Dawn doesn't so much arrive as it seeps in pale and reluctant, the color of wet parchment. The rain has stopped, leaving everything slick and shining. The city smells faintly of ash and yeast, as if even the chimneys dreamed of bread overnight. The baker is already awake, of course. He moves through the room like a shadow that's learned routine. His hands know exactly where everything is. The bowl, the scoop, the jug, the starter jar, now bubbling quietly like it's whispering good morning. He hums the same tuneless melody you've heard every night, the one that somehow fits no rhythm and every rhythm at once. You watch him work without hurry. Every motion feels deliberate, the scoop of flour, the trickle of water, the slow circle of his hand stirring the mixture. It's not work so much as a meditation, a conversation between one life and another. Another morning, he murmurs. Another loaf, you say. He glances up, smiling faintly. Ah, you're starting to speak the language. The apprentice stumbles in moments later, looking precisely like someone who's been at a festival and made poor life choices. His hair's damp, his eyes bloodshot, and his grin is sheepish. You were right, he croaks. The night gave me back. Didn't ask first, though. The baker chuckles. You smell like theology and bad ale. The boy groans. It was St. Martin's fault. St. Martin didn't pour your second cup. The apprentice waves a hand weakly, then slumps onto a stool. The baker slides a cup of water toward him. Drink. You'll need to apologize to your body later. He turns back to his work. See, he says to you. Even bad bread rises eventually. The boy mumbles something that might be gratitude. The oven hums back to life as the fire takes. The baker's arms move with the confidence of muscle memory. You can see it now, how the world outside might change endlessly, but this ritual doesn't. It's older than kings and newer every morning. He glances at the door. The poorhouse will come soon. Right on cue, there's a soft knock. A woman stands there, shawl pulled tight, a woven basket balanced on her hip. Her eyes are tired but kind. The baker greets her by name. And you realize she's been coming here longer than anyone can count. Morning, Tom, she says. We've got 6 mouths more today. Then you'll get 6 loaves more. He gestures to the sleepers on the counter. She lifts the cloth and breathes in, closing her eyes for a moment, as if the smell itself were a blessing. You've done good again, she says. The baker shrugs. The dough did most of the work. She smiles. And you did the rest. As she loads the loaves into her basket, one slips and almost falls. You catch it just in time. It's still warm. You can feel the weight of it heavier than it looks, as though it's carrying every hour that led to this moment. The woman nods in thanks, tucks the bread away, and presses a hand briefly to the baker's arm. They'll eat in peace today, she says softly. Then she leaves, her steps fading into the morning. The baker stands quietly for a while after she's gone, watching the doorway. That's the only part that still feels like prayer, he says. The apprentice groans. You're getting sentimental again. Good. It means the bread's ready. You laugh, and the baker grins. You'll see, he says to the boy. When you've been doing this long enough, even silence tastes like gratitude. Historians still debate whether medieval charity loaves were acts of devotion or necessity. Some call them penance, others compassion baked into daily habit. But here, in this quiet shop that smells of ash and dawn, it doesn't matter. It's both. Always both. The baker begins shaping a new dough, his hands gentle but sure. "You know," he says, "every loaf has a story, even if it never gets told. The grain grew in someone's field. The miller lost sleep grinding it. We carried it home through rain. And now someone will eat it and call it simple." He smiles faintly. "Nothing simple about it, though." You nod. "Most miracles aren't." The baker glances at you, and for the first time, his expression is almost proud. "You're learning faster than the boy." The apprentice groans again from his stool. "I can still hear you." "Good," says the baker. "That means you're still alive." The three of you share a small laugh that feels like a sigh. The sound blends with the hum of the oven and the whisper of wind outside a soft trinity of ordinary things that somehow hold the world together. The baker opens the window. Sunlight slides in across the flower-covered table, glinting off his hands. Dust drifts in the air like stars trying out daylight for the first time. He gestures toward the light. "You know what that is?" You shake your head. "Forgiveness," he says simply. "Every morning, the sun forgives the world for what it did yesterday." He looks down at the dough in his hands, and the bread does the same. Outside, the sound of morning grows louder, roosters, wheels, voices, the slow heartbeat of another day beginning its loop. Inside, the baker kneads quietly, the apprentice watches, and you listen to the soft rhythm that turns labor into grace. You realize then that the bakery isn't just a place that makes bread. It's a clock, a sanctuary, and a confession booth, all at once, where time is counted not by seconds but by loaves. And peace comes baked, not found. And somewhere, in that warm, yeasty silence, you begin to understand why medieval bakers talk to their bread. Because it was the only thing in the world that always, quietly, answered back. By mid-morning, the city is fully awake again, louder this time, as if trying to make up for the hush of the night before. The streets bustle with carts, boots, and the usual medieval soundtrack of chickens negotiating passage rights. From the bakery doorway, you can see a stream of people crossing the square, merchants shouting prices, children chasing one another with crusts for swords, a stray dog conducting an independent bread inspection service. Inside, the bakery is cooler now. The last of the dawn heat has drifted into memory, leaving behind the steady rhythm of work. The baker moves slower than usual, his energy worn but steady, like an old mill that's found its pace. He brushes the flour from his forearms. "Smells different today," he says, sniffing the air. You nod. "More smoke?" He grins. "Less worry." The apprentice groans from where he's slumped, beside a sack of grain. "You sound like a poem, and I haven't even recovered from the last one." "You'll survive," says the baker, placing a dough-filled bowl near him. "Knead this. Gently. Pretend it's your conscience." The boy drags himself upright, muttering, but does as he's told. His movements are clumsy at first, then settle into the rhythm of the work. You can see it happen the way effort slowly tames irritation, the way touch teaches focus. "Better," the baker murmurs. "Bread teaches, even when you're not listening." The morning light sharpens, cutting through the floury haze, scattering golden patterns across the table. You notice, for the first time, how beautiful the ordinary can be, the way air glows in dust, the way sound softens against wood, the way routine becomes music if you stand still long enough. The baker steps outside for a moment. You follow him. The air smells faintly metallic from the rain, laced with sweetness from a nearby honey stall. The rooftops drip slowly into gutters, and sunlight reflects off puddles like tiny mirrors. He looks toward the river. "See that?" he says. "That's where the mill sends its water back. The same water that turned the wheel comes home again." You squint into the brightness. Everything returns. "Eventually," he says. "The trick is remembering what it was when it left." He turns back inside, not waiting for a reply, and you realize that's the rhythm of his whole life, moving from one repetition to another, trusting that somewhere in the circle, meaning is hiding. A few minutes later, the first customers arrive. The bell above the door gives a small, nervous jingle, and a familiar parade begins. The washerwoman who always complains that bread prices follow moon phases, the butcher who insists on paying with exact change down to the half penny, and an old scholar who buys only crusts for study purposes. The baker greets them all by name, by tone, by history. You realize that for these people, the bakery isn't just where food is bought, it's where the day officially starts. "Morning, Tom," the butcher says, tossing a coin. "Heard the monks say you bake better than you pray." The baker smiles. That's because the oven actually listens. Laughter ripples through the room. The old scholar snorts so hard flour puffs into his beard. The apprentice hides a grin. There's a peace in these exchanges, small, simple, real. No grandeur, no ceremony. Just people orbiting the same quiet fire, pretending life makes sense as long as bread exists. Historians still debate whether medieval bakeries doubled as social hubs. Some claim they were early forms of community centers, places where news, gossip, and warmth shared the same table. Watching it now, it's impossible to doubt. When the last customer leaves, the baker sits at the table and exhales deeply. "That's the real miracle," he says. "Not that the dough rises, but that people keep showing up." He wipes his hands and leans back. You'd think they'd get tired of the same loaf every day. "They're not coming for the loaf," you say. "They're coming for the piece that smells like one." He raises an eyebrow. "Ah, now you're the poet. Learned from the best." He smiles at that, not wide but sincere, the kind that looks like memory catching up to the present. The apprentice interrupts, holding up his misshapen dough proudly. "It's alive," he says, "mostly." The baker stands, studies it, and nods. "Ugly bread feeds just as well." He dusts his hands and adds, "Remember that perfection's the enemy of supper." You watch as they laugh, as the oven door creaks open again, as the scent of new bread mingles with the fading smoke of the old fire. The day stretches forward, the wheel keeps turning, and the rhythm continues endless, comforting, absurdly human. The baker looks toward you as he slides the dough into the flame. "You've seen nearly everything now," he says quietly. "The dawn, the work, the silence after. But there's one last thing." He nods toward the sleeping street. "Wait until the next storm. That's when bread tells the truth." You don't know what he means yet, but you suspect you'll stay long enough to find out. The day unspools into afternoon again, the way it always does here, unhurried, circular, inevitable. The light shifts to a warmer hue, filling the bakery with a honeyed calm. The air hums with the faint crackle of cooling crusts and the soft shuffle of the baker cleaning his counter for the 100th time. Outside, clouds gather in a low grey arc, heavy with unsaid rain. The baker notices first. "There," he murmurs, "right on schedule." You glance out the window. The light is changing fast, silver at first, then dull pewter. The square outside has emptied. Even the pigeons look nervous. Somewhere far off, thunder clears its throat. The apprentice eyes the door warily. "We're not baking through another storm, are we?" The baker grins. "We bake through everything. That's the point." You remember what he said earlier, that's when bread tells the truth. You watch him now, curious. He begins pulling down sacks from the shelves, mixing flour with an energy that feels almost ceremonial. The rhythm of his movements sharpens. The soft shuffling from before turns into deliberate percussion. His hands move like he's conducting something invisible, the storm, maybe, or time itself. He speaks while he works. Storms change everything. The air gets heavy, the yeast slows down, the fire sulks. Bread stops pretending to be obedient. He cracks a small smile. That's when you find out if you've really learned to listen. The first drops begin tapping against the window, slow at first, then faster. The sound fills the room like fingers drumming on wood. Thunder rumbles closer, deep and low. The baker sets the dough to rest, covers it with a damp cloth, and sits beside the oven. "We wait now," he says, voice softer. "The air will do what it wants." The apprentice slumps beside him, clutching a broom like a nervous talisman. "I hate storms," he mutters. "Everyone does," the baker says. "That's why they're honest." Lightning flashes a brief burst of light that paints the bakery in stark whites and blacks. For a heartbeat, Everything looks ancient. The fire, the flour, the worn wood, the faces turned toward the glow. Then darkness returns, and the sound of rain swells like applause. The baker hums again, that same wordless tune. The rhythm matches the rain, uneven, gentle, alive. You sit still, watching. The cloth over the dough rises and falls, slow and stubborn, breathing against the thunder. The fire flares once in protest, then steadies. The smell of warm grain deepens heavier now, almost metallic, as if it's borrowing from the weather. He looks toward you. "This is what I meant," he says. "Bread made in a storm has no illusions. You can't control it, only guide it." Same as people. Historians still debate whether bakers truly believed storms affected their craft or whether that was metaphor disguised as method. Surviving notes from a Paris Guild record advise bakers to speak softly on thunder days, perhaps superstition, perhaps wisdom. The baker lifts the cloth after a while and nods. "It's ready." "How can you tell?" you ask. He grins. "It told me." The apprentice rolls his eyes. Bread doesn't talk. The baker arches an eyebrow. "Then what have we been hearing all our lives?" He opens the oven, and the light spills out orange, alive, almost defiant. Rain drums harder against the windows, but inside it's all warmth and crackling sound. The baker slides the dough in, with practiced ease, closes the door, and leans. "Back. Now," he says quietly. We listen again. For a long time, no one speaks. The storm outside thrashes and sighs, but inside, the bakery feels suspended, a pocket of calm carved out of chaos. The sound of the fire deepens. Every pop and hiss seems to echo something ancient. Then the smell begins. It rolls through the room slowly, thick and comforting, the scent of bread rising in defiance of thunder. It mingles with smoke and rain, creating something you can't name but recognize instantly. Home, maybe. Or memory. The baker closes his eyes. "There," he whispers. "That's the truth. It never stops. The world can break, and still something rises." The apprentice looks skeptical but quiets. He's listening now too. Everyone is. Lightning flickers again, followed by a deep rumble that shakes the windows. The oven hums softly, the loaves inside glowing through the small crack in the iron door. The baker opens one eye and smirks. "Even the sky's jealous." You laugh, though it comes out more like an exhale. He stands slowly, stretches, and nods toward the fire. "We'll pull them soon. Storm bread bakes faster. It's impatient, like everything else tonight." You glance outside. The street is empty, puddles flashing in the lightning. The air feels charged, alive. Inside, everything glows. And in that moment, the rain hammering the roof, the baker's steady hand on the oven door, the scent of warmth cutting through the cold, you understand what he meant. Bread doesn't lie. It rises, or it doesn't. It forgives, or it fails. But in the middle of a storm, it still tries. And maybe that's the truest thing any human ever made. The storm lingers long enough to make you forget when it began. The world outside is grey noise and flickering light. But in the bakery, time has folded into something softer, like being inside a heartbeat that refuses to end. The fire sighs, the oven hums, and the smell of bread curls through the air like comfort made visible. The baker watches the door of the oven the way a sailor watches the horizon. "Almost," he says. You can tell by the sound. You listen. There's a faint whisper, tiny crackles and pops, as if the bread is whispering back to the rain. It feels alive, or maybe you've been here long enough to believe it. The apprentice peers over the counter. "How can bread have a sound?" The baker tilts his head. Same way thunder does. Pressure, patience, and a good sense of timing. He glances toward you. That's what separates a baker from a cook. A cook commands fire. A baker negotiates with it. You smile. Diplomacy through dough. "Exactly," he says. "It's a political career that ends in crumbs." He opens the oven. The light leaps out like a greeting. Inside, the loaves glow in quiet triumph, golden and uneven. They look humble, but the kind of humble that knows it just survived chaos. He slides the first loaf onto the paddle and brings it out. Steam spills into the room, carrying that rich, elemental scent, Warm air, sweet smoke, the faint tang of life rewritten in heat. He sets the loaf on the table, listening to its slow, crackling exhale. "That," he says softly, "is the storm leaving the bread." The apprentice, wide-eyed, leans closer. "It's singing." The baker grins. "Everything does, if you've been quiet long enough." You reach out and touch the crust, warm, almost pulsing. The texture feels like something earned. Outside, the thunder has moved farther away. The rain softens, turning from percussion to lullaby. The baker cuts the loaf open with a long, steady motion. The inside steams gently, pale gold, full of small, irregular bubbles that look like frozen breaths. He hands you a piece, then one to the apprentice. You all taste in silence. It's different. The flavor is darker, richer, as if the storm itself left a fingerprint behind. The apprentice blinks. "It tastes alive." The baker nods. "That's because it is. Everything we make keeps a piece of the day that made it." He chews slowly, thoughtfully. People think bread's about flour and water. It isn't. It's about what's happening outside. Weather, mood, fatigue, faith, fear. Every loaf's a diary. You glance toward the window. The rain has thinned to mist. The clouds glow faintly, uncertain whether to leave. The baker pours 3 cups of wine and lifts his in quiet salute. "To the storm," he says. The apprentice raises his own. "To the bread that survived it." You add softly, "To the hands that shaped it." The cups clink, a small sound against the endless rhythm of water. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers marked storm days in their ledgers, but some fragments suggest they did. Loaves sold during rain were given blessings or nicknames. Thunderbread, rain rolls, lightning crusts. Maybe it was superstition, or maybe it was memory disguised as trade. The baker leans back, eyes half closed. "Storm bread keeps longer," he says. "Don't know why. Maybe it remembers how to resist." He takes another bite, chews, and smirks. Or maybe it's just stubborn, like me. The apprentice yawns. "If you start calling yourself Tom the Yeast Whisperer, I'm leaving." "You say that every day," the baker says. "Yeah," the boy mutters. "And yet, I'm still here." The baker chuckles. "That's how you know you're learning." He gathers the loaves one by one, setting them carefully on the rack. "You see," he says quietly, "storms remind us what heat is for. Without the rain, we forget the fire's a gift." He wipes his hands on his apron, that eternal gesture of closing a thought, and looks around the room. Everything glows faintly orange, as if the storm left behind its own kind of blessing. You feel the shift too. The air has changed lighter now, as though the bakery itself has exhaled. The baker's voice drops to a whisper. "Tomorrow, we'll start again. The same recipe, the same motions, but the bread will know the difference. It always does." He smiles, tired but certain. Every storm teaches the dough something new. Every loaf remembers. Outside, a final rumble rolls across the sky, not angry now, but sleepy, satisfied. The baker lifts the last loaf from the oven, holds it for a moment in both hands, and murmurs something too soft to catch a prayer, or maybe just a thank you. Then he sets it down, sighs, and says, "Well, that's enough truth for one night." You sit together in the fading light, listening as the storm drifts away and the bread cools, both whispering the same soft promise. Tomorrow, we rise again. Morning breaks, clean and colorless, that peculiar kind of light that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air outside the bakery is washed and new, heavy with the scent of wet earth and yesterday's smoke. The storm has left the streets shining, every puddle holding a small, quiet reflection of the world above it. Inside, everything feels freshly awake. The oven hums faintly, a low heartbeat in a house of stillness. You find the baker already moving, sleeves rolled, hands buried in a bowl of flour. Of course he's awake. You suspect he never really slept. "Did the storm sleep well?" you ask. He smirks without looking up. It snored. The apprentice trudges in a moment later, rubbing his eyes, muttering something about sore shoulders. "You two actually like waking up this early?" he groans. The baker glances up. "You'll learn to. The world's quieter before it remembers it has worries." The boy groans again and collapses onto the bench. The world can worry without me. The baker hands him a chunk of dough. Then it will. Knead. The boy sighs but obeys. You watch the familiar scene unfold. Hands pressing, folding, coaxing. The rhythm returns easily, as if the storm never happened, or perhaps because of it. There's comfort in the repetition, the strange peace of doing something that has been done for 1,000 years the same way. The baker hums softly again, the same tune he always hums, but this morning it sounds brighter. The fire crackles along in rhythm, the occasional pot punctuating his melody. He looks up after a while. Do you know why bakers start before dawn? You shake your head. So they can give the morning to someone else. He smiles faintly. By the time the city wakes, breakfast is already waiting. They open their doors and smell comfort. And for a moment, they think the world's kind. He dusts his hands. That's our work. We make the day smell better than it is. You glance toward the door. Outside, the first few people are stirring, merchants, hauling crates, a milk cart rattling over wet stone. The world, still sleepy, already beginning to rebuild its noise. The baker steps to the window and watches. See how everyone looks different after a storm? Softer, like they remember how fragile things are. He turns back to the counter. Storm bread does that too, changes how people move, makes them chew slower, think longer. The apprentice raises an eyebrow. Or maybe it's just heavier. The baker grins. Maybe. Philosophy's just hunger with manners. Historians still debate how much bread shaped medieval moods. Some say scarcity bred superstition, that weather, crop yields, and daily bread decided whether a town prayed or rioted. Others argue bread was more than sustenance. It was peace, community, a promise of continuity in a world that changed too fast. You think of all the people who'll come through the door today, each one carrying their own quiet need. For some, the bread will be breakfast. For others, a small act of hope. The baker pulls a fresh loaf from the oven. Perfect, he says. You can smell patience in this one. You do. It smells different, lighter, sweeter, calmer. As if the storm had burned away everything unnecessary. He slices a piece for each of you. Taste it, he says. Tell me what you hear. You chew slowly. It's soft, balanced, faintly smoky. The flavor feels like silence turned edible. The apprentice frowns, thinking, it tastes peaceful. The baker nods. Exactly. That's what forgiveness tastes like. He doesn't explain, and you don't need him to. The bread speaks for itself. You sit together for a while, eating quietly as sunlight slides through the window. The air feels clearer somehow, as if the city is still deciding what kind of day it wants to be. The baker leans back, eyes half closed. You know, he says, people think storms ruin everything. But they don't. They clean. They remind you what's worth keeping. He gestures toward the oven, still glowing faintly. That fire, for example, same one as yesterday. But look how it shines today, calmer, steadier. It knows what it survived. The apprentice yawns. You sound like a priest again. The baker shrugs. Maybe bakers and priests aren't so different. We both deal in faith and waiting. We both talk to things that don't answer right away. You smile, and sometimes they do. He nods. If you're quiet enough. Outside, the church bells begin to ring slow, clear, and bright after the storm. The sound threads through the open window, mingling with the crackle of the fire. For a moment, the whole world seems to share the same rhythm. The baker stands, brushes flour from his hands, and looks out at the street. There, he says. The city's waking. Time to feed it. He turns to the apprentice. Open the door. The boy obeys. The hinge creaks, the air shifts, and the smell of warm bread escapes into the world again, the first true announcement of morning. People begin to arrive one by one, drawn by scent more than reason. A woman with a shawl, a man with wet boots, a sleepy child clutching a coin. Each face softens as they step inside, as if crossing the threshold resets something small but vital. The baker greets them the same way he always does, with quiet warmth, as if he's been waiting just for them. And as the loaves change hands, the day begins again, ordinary, miraculous, endlessly rising. You sit back, watching the exchange unfold, the smell of bread mixing with sunlight and distant church bells. And you think, maybe this is what eternity really is. Not endless time, but the same small kindness, repeated until it feels sacred. By midday, the sun has climbed high enough to make the puddles vanish, and the bakery walls glow. The storm is only a rumor now, its memory folded into the loaves cooling on the counter. The city outside hums with the busy, forgiving rhythm of ordinary life, returning to itself. The baker moves slower now, as though the calm has settled into his bones. The apprentice hums while sweeping, turning the day's stray crumbs into a small pile that looks almost ceremonial. You sit near the window, watching light dance across the flour in the air. The bakery feels bigger today, though nothing has changed. Maybe it's what happens when a space fills with peace instead of sound. The baker looks up from his table. You notice, he says, after storms, everyone buys bread again, even those who swore yesterday they wouldn't. You nod. Maybe people just want proof that something can rise after falling. He smiles at that, faint but real. That's it. Bread is proof. The apprentice stops sweeping. Proof of what? That the world still works, says the baker. You feed it, it grows. You wait, it rewards you. You forget, it forgives you once. After that, it burns. The boy laughs. Sounds like marriage. Exactly, the baker replies, straight-faced. You can't help but smile. This is how their world breathes, through dry jokes and small tasks, through quiet wisdom that sneaks in when no one's trying to sound wise. The baker gestures toward the rack of loaves cooling in neat golden rows. These are for the travelers, he says. They'll come before sundown, heading south to the fair. Bread's lighter to carry than regret. He pauses, eyes on the window. Travelers always come after rain. Roads wash clean, and people remember they were meant to go somewhere. You imagine the dusty roads beyond the city, still damp from the night's storm, the faint prints of cartwheels and bare feet. Bread, you think, is what connects them all, the quiet currency of survival. Historians still debate whether medieval trade routes owed their success more to roads or to bread. Some claim that villages grew wherever a bakery could keep travelers fed. Others insist that bakers were the silent architects of civilization, mapping the world in crumbs. The apprentice finishes sweeping and leans on the broom. Do you ever want to leave, Tom? The baker hesitates, then shrugs. Sometimes. But the world's wide, and ovens are stubborn travelers. He runs a hand over the warm wood of the counter. I think I'd miss this more than I'd miss the road. He glances at you. You ever notice how most people spend their lives chasing what they already have? Warmth, work, someone to talk to. The trick is realizing it before you leave. You nod. So you stayed. He smiles. I stayed because I found everything I was looking for before I could name it. The apprentice rolls his eyes, but his voice softens. You talk like a monk. Again. The baker chuckles. I keep telling you we're in the same business. They make souls rise. I make dough rise. Same principle. Fewer sermons. Outside, the bells from the nearby church ring for noon. The sound fills the street, soft but certain, and the baker glances toward the door. Lunch crowd's coming, he says. Ready yourself. The apprentice groans but straightens up. Together, they move with the wordless efficiency of habit. Bread to baskets, baskets to counter, counter to hungry hands. The room fills with murmured greetings, clinking coins, and the rustle of cloth wrapping fresh loaves. You watch as faces come and go, farmers, widows, children, travellers, each one leaving with the same look of quiet satisfaction. No one thanks him outright, but every nod, every softened expression, carries gratitude unspoken. And somewhere between the exchanges, you realize what makes this bakery so alive. It isn't the bread, or even the fire. It's the rhythm of giving day after day, loaf after loaf, until generosity becomes ordinary enough to feel eternal. When the last customer leaves, the baker wipes the counter, sighs, and leans on his elbows. There, he says, world fed, for now. The apprentice sits down, exhausted. And we'll do it again tomorrow? Of course, the baker says. That's the promise. We rise, we bake, we rest, we start again. He looks toward the window, where the sky has begun to turn the faint colour of honey. You'd think that would get dull, wouldn't you? You shake your head. Not if you're paying attention. He nods, pleased. Exactly. Boredom only happens when you stop noticing the small miracles. The apprentice laughs softly. You're going to turn me into a philosopher. The baker smiles. Good. The world needs more thinkers who know how to feed people. The day drifts toward afternoon. The loaves cool in silence. The world beyond the bakery continues its quite endless chatter. But inside, everything feels still, full, complete. The baker lifts one of the warm loaves, weighs it in his hand, and says quietly, You know, some people chase purpose all their lives. Me? I just bake it every morning. And with that, he sets the loaf down gently as though even meaning, like bread, is something you must let rest before it's ready to share. By late afternoon, the light has turned syrup slow, that amber hour when even dust moves like it's remembering something. The bakery is quiet again, emptied of its rush, the air thick with the calm hum of cooling bread. Outside, the city glows, wet rooftops catching gold, the river gleaming like melted brass. The baker stands by the doorway, leaning on the frame. His shadow stretches across the floorboards, long and soft. Every day ends the same, he says, and somehow, that's a blessing. The apprentice, perched on a flour sack, flips a small crust of bread between his hands. Feels strange when it's too quiet, he says, like the air's waiting for something. It's waiting for night, the baker says simply. Everything does. You step closer to the window. The marketplace across the street is already dismantling itself. Stalls closing, buckets clanking, the smell of fruit giving way to the faint metallic scent of dusk. The world is packing itself in, ready to start over again tomorrow. The baker turns from the window and begins stacking the day's trays, moving slower now, methodically, like someone who's learned to end things well. You know, he says, people always think the hard part is baking, but really, it's stopping. You tilt your head. Stopping? He nods, putting the paddle down, letting the fire rest, knowing when enough is enough. He looks at the oven, still faintly glowing. If you keep feeding the flame, it eats what you meant to save. The apprentice glances up from his crust. Is that another bread metaphor? The baker smirks. Aren't they all? You laugh softly. The sound fills the room like light spilling into a forgotten corner. He turns back to the counter and begins brushing away the day's flour. A ritual you've seen 100 times now, yet it never loses its calm. His hands make quiet arcs through the air. Graceful, certain. Each sweep erases something. A mess, a moment, a worry. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers truly cleaned between every batch, or left the flour as a kind of good luck residue. In some towns, the dust of yesterday's dough was called the ghost layer, a whisper of memory baked into the next day's bread. You mention that, and the baker nods. Ghost layer. I like that. Feels true. Everything we make has a bit of yesterday in it. He pauses, then adds quietly, everyone too. Outside, the sky deepens to violet. Smoke curls from chimneys, slow and uncertain, as if it doesn't want to leave. You can hear a bell ringing somewhere far away, its echoes softening through the damp air. The apprentice yawns and leans against the wall. Feels like the world's tired. It is, says the baker. But tired isn't bad. Tired means we've done something worth sleeping after. He pours 3 cups of water this time, no wine, just cool well water that tastes faintly of stone. 2 endings, he says. The apprentice clinks his cup. To naps, you lift yours. To the ghost layer, the baker chuckles. Perfect. You drink together, the quiet stretching comfortably between sips. After a while, the baker reaches for a small loaf, one of the storm batch, now perfectly cooled, and cuts it open. The inside gleams slightly in the fading light, shot through with tiny gold pockets of air. He tears off 3 pieces, one for each of you. End of the day bread, he says. Tastes better if you've earned it. It does. The flavor is simple and deep, faintly smoky, almost sweet, the kind of taste that doesn't ask for words. The baker chews slowly, eyes on the dimming window. Tomorrow, the air will change again. Maybe drier, maybe colder. The dough will act different. The fire will need coaxing. The loaves will tell a new story. He turns toward you. But it'll still be the same work, the same rhythm. That's how the world stays kind. You nod, feeling the truth of it settle in your chest like warmth. The apprentice finishes his piece and wipes his hands. You ever think of what happens to all the bread after we're gone? The baker smiles faintly. Someone else will bake it. Maybe they'll use my paddle, or maybe they'll build a better oven. But they'll still talk to the dough. They'll still listen for the crackle when it cools. The fire will keep its memory. He walks to the window and opens it a little wider. Cool air slides in, carrying the sound of evening, the faint murmur of voices, a dog barking once, the slow creak of shutters closing. Listen, he says. That's the city's heartbeat. It slows down just before night takes over. You close your eyes for a moment. The warmth of the room, the cool wind, the smell of bread, all of it blends into one seamless, peaceful hum. The baker speaks softly, almost to himself. When I was younger, I used to think bread was about feeding people. Now I think it's about reminding them to breathe. He sets the last tray aside, dusts his hands, and nods toward the fire. Let it rest, he says. The apprentice lowers the iron door, muffling the glow. The light in the room dims, shifting from orange to gold to quiet grey. The baker stretches his back and sighs, a sound halfway between relief and gratitude. There, he murmurs. That's the sound of a day finished properly. You look around, crumbs like stars on the counter, the faint smell of ash in the air, the hush of a city catching its breath. Everything feels balanced, fragile, beautiful, and perfectly enough. The baker looks at you, eyes calm, and says, "Tomorrow will come." It always does. But tonight, the world belongs to the ovens. And as dusk finally settles, the bakery becomes what it was always meant to be, a small, glowing heart in the body of a sleeping city, keeping time with the rise and fall of everything that's ever learned to rest. Night folds itself, gently over the city again. The sky turns the color of cool ink. The cobblestones glisten where the last of the day's light lingers. The bakery hums like a sleeping animal, warm, steady, breathing in its own quiet way. The baker moves slowly now, each motion softer, smaller. He is not working anymore. He's simply tidying up the edges of the world. He closes the shutters halfway, stirs the fire one last time, and wipes the counter in long, slow arcs that feel more like a lullaby than cleaning. The apprentice has fallen asleep in his chair, head tipped back, mouth slightly open. A faint trail of flour crosses his cheek like a pilgrim's mark. The baker smiles at the sight, tired amusement mixed with fondness. He'll wake with the imprint of bread on his dreams, he murmurs. You sit nearby, watching it all. The warmth in the air is gentle now, not the fierce glow of the morning fire, but something tender, almost human. The scent of the day still hangs in the room, smoke, grain, a hint of sweetness, and under it, the deep hum of peace that comes when everything necessary has already been done. Outside, the street is quiet, except for the occasional wheel creaking or a lone voice echoing across stone. The river's whisper has returned, washing softly against the city's edge. The baker pours a final cup of water, lifts it slightly, and says, "To the night." You echo it. To the night. He drinks, then sits, elbows on knees. Funny thing, he says, when you spend your life waking before everyone else, you learn to love the end more than the beginning. Mornings are promises, evenings are truths. He pauses, looking toward the cooling oven. Bread's the same. When it's rising, it's hope. When it's baked, it's memory. He looks down at his hands, turns them palm up, examines the faint burns and cracks that never quite heal. These are my diary, he says softly. Every loaf leaves a line. For a while, no one speaks. The silence deepens, not empty, but rich, like soil that's been turned over and left to rest. The air hums faintly with the sound of cooling loaves, the tiny crackles, the soft sighs. It's the sound of heat becoming stillness, of work turning into peace. You realize how everything in this small place moves in circles. The day, the fire, the dough, the talk, the silence. Nothing ends. It just folds back into itself, over and over, until even time forgets to hurry. The baker stands and opens the window a little. Cool air slides in, carrying the scent of damp stone and faint wood smoke. Somewhere, a nightingale begins to sing clear, measured, unconcerned. The sound floats into the room like a thread, weaving through the drifting flour dust. He smiles faintly. "That's my favorite part of the day," he says. "When everything that made noise all day finally remembers, it doesn't need to." He glances at the apprentice. Even him. You laugh quietly. The sound feels right. Here, like a candle being lit rather than struck. The baker turns back to you. "You should sleep soon. The world will start again before you know it. Fires never wait for permission." You nod, feeling the heaviness of warmth pulling you gently inward. He leans against the doorframe, looking out at the night. "You know," he says, "historians can argue all they want why we baked at night, why we talked to bread. The truth's simpler." He looks at the faint steam still drifting from the loaves. "We talked to it because it listened. Because in a world that never stops demanding, the dough was the one thing that answered quietly." He closes his eyes for a moment, and his voice drops to a whisper. And if you listened long enough, you could almost hear it breathe back. "I'm still here." You sit still, letting the quiet expand. The wind outside moves gently. The fire sighs its last ember glow. And somewhere far off, another bell tolls a single, low note that feels like the day exhaling. The baker stretches, nods once, and begins extinguishing the lamps. The room darkens, each flame going out with a soft hiss, until only the oven's faint red pulse remains. He places his hand on its door for a moment, almost reverent. "Rest well," he murmurs to it. Then he turns to you. "That's how we end things here slowly, so the silence doesn't get startled." He smiles, a weary, kind smile. "Tomorrow, the fire will wake before the sun. We'll start again. Same dough, same songs, same foolish hope. That's all this life really asks for." He gestures toward the sleeping apprentice, toward the racks of cooling bread, toward the small window spilling moonlight onto the floor. "Look at that. Proof that quiet work matters." The room seems to breathe with him, warmth inhaling, stillness exhaling. He sits again, folds his hands, and speaks so softly it's almost a prayer. Everything rises, everything rests, everything returns. The night holds its breath with him. And then the bakery, the fire, the city itself seem to sigh in agreement, as if the whole world were finally allowed to close its eyes. The baker smiles one last time. "Now," he whispers, "let's ease into sleep." The fire fades to ember, the air cools, and the story folds itself shut, like a well-worn loaf, cooling on a wooden board, soft, simple, and whole. The night stretches, longer now, slower. The warmth of the oven lingers like memory across the floorboards. Outside, the streets fade into the hush of stars. You can still smell the bread, faint, sweet, and calm, the scent that means everything is safe and ordinary and good. You breathe it in. The sound of the city is barely there. A horse stamping once in the distance, the whisper of the river carrying old secrets away. Even the bells have gone quiet, as if they, too, have decided to rest. You close your eyes and feel the quiet working its way through you, soft as flour dust. The martyrs, the rhythm of the bakery, the rise, the rest, the fire cooling, echoes the rhythm of your body. The same calm repetition that kept the city fed now keeps your heart slow and even. Somewhere in the dark, a loaf finishes cooling with a tiny, satisfied crackle. The sound is small but certain, like the world confirming it has done enough for today. You think of the baker's words. Everything rises, everything rests, everything returns. And as your breathing matches the quiet rhythm of the fire's last glow, the city drifts farther away. The scent of bread becomes the scent of sleep. The sound of rain becomes the sound of calm. The fire becomes the warmth of your own heartbeat. Nothing rushes here, nothing demands. Only the quiet remains whole, round, and soft as a cooling loaf under the moon.